Okay.
Okay, thank you. And do we actually need to take roll, or can you just get attendance off of the Zoom list?
I would like to, so that we have it in the audio. So I'll go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, please do.
Jeff Alfs,
Here.
Amy Armsby,
Present.
Sue Crane,
Here.
Sarah Doré. How do I pronounce that?
Dorothy. Here.
Dorhe. Okay, great. Eric Doyle will not be present this afternoon. William Kelly,
Here.
Ann Koffsill,
Here.
Al Sill.
Here.
It looks like Nicholas Targ is just joining, so we can reflect that in the record that he's joining right now. Bob Turcott,
Here.
Karen Vatra,
Here.
Janie Ward,
Here.
Sarah Warnikoff,
Here.
Jocelyn Swisher,
Here.
Helen Walter. Okay, so Helen is not present.
Okay, but we do have a quorum. So, by the way, I will chair the meeting until we elect a chair and vice chair in item 2. That will bring us to our first item, which is oral communications. If anyone wants to address the committee on an item not on the agenda, it's a fairly vague agenda, but if anyone wants to address this on an item that's not on this agenda, now is the time to do so. I will limit comments to 3 minutes today, but you may raise your hand now and speak if you wish to.
I'm just looking. I don't see any attendees with hands up. We have 15 attendees if people are interested in that information.
Yes. Okay, I don't see any hands either. In that case, we will move on then to item 2, which is selecting a chair and vice chair. I guess we'll elect them separately. Yes.
I'm sorry, Jeff, through the chair.
Yes,
we were
please.
actually hoping to do introductions first.
Oh, you want? Okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
before,
Okay.
so that people can meet each other a bit before the selection of chair and vice chair.
All right, that sounds fine. Sorry, did I read that wrong? You're right, I did read that wrong. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so we'll do a brief introduction. I'll start. I'm Jeff Alfs. I'm a council member, have been a council member since 2011. And obviously I'm here sort of representing the council's interest. I've been thinking about this problem and related problems for a long time now. I was actually on the council the last time we did a housing element, although I think the environment has changed quite a bit since then. So I'm here to hopefully work with all of you and come up with sort of the best solutions we can to what is becoming a very complicated question about housing. Let's see, Sarah, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm the newest council member. I was elected last November. So this is my first go around of a housing element. My background professionally, way back was in e-commerce marketing, my last job being running e-commerce for Pottery Barn Kids. Then spent about 10 years raising my kids, volunteering through the school district. I was PTO president and on the foundation board and a variety of other things. I've served on various nonprofit boards. Most recently, professionally, I was COO of a organization that recruits women to run for office in the state of California. And yeah, I was just elected last year. I've got, my family's lived here for 15 years and I have raised 3 kids here. Amy, I think you're next. Armsby, at least on my screen.
Curse of having an A in my last name.
Try 2, yeah, but
Can
yeah,
you,
go ahead.
is the stuff getting through okay? Okay. Yeah, Jeff, you're even more A than I am. It's nice to see everyone. My name is Amy Armsby, and I've been a Portola Valley resident since about 2010. Put 4 kids through the Portola Valley schools. I was a long-time member of the Portola Valley Schools Foundation. I was the president for the past 3 years. Now I'm on the Woodside High School Foundation. They really get you quick when you make that move. And I have 2 daughters currently in high school at Woodside. I'm an attorney by profession. Until very recently, I was the lead deputy county counsel for San Mateo County, primarily representing the San Mateo Medical Center and health-related, health and public health-related clients. So that's my background.
Thank you, Amy. I see Ann next, Ann Kopsell.
Hi, I'm Ann Kopsell. I've lived in Portola Valley 33 years. My professional background is the biotech industry, technical and management leadership, and also some in contracts working for Stanford's licensing department. I am currently on the Planning Commission, which is why I'm on this committee, is to help bridge the work this committee does to Planning Commission, which would require possibly zoning changes. I served for many years on the Emergency Preparedness Committee of town, and both as a committee member and as chair for a couple of years.
Thanks, Ann. Sue, I see you next.
Okay, I'm Sue Crane. My intro and response to the question, why does the housing element update matter to me, are really linked. Our family moved to Portola Valley in 1964. I remember this. It was July 14th and the town was celebrating its incorporation. Our house was in Alpine Hills. The town hall was just down the road in that little building where Windmill Nursery School used to be. Our three boys were about 4, 5, and 6 when we moved here. For a reference point, they're in their 60s now. I have always been interested and active in the town. During those years, I was active in the schools, served on the town committees, on many town committees, the General Plan Review Committee, Planning Commission, Town Council, and served 2 terms as mayor. 7 years ago, I moved to the Sequoias, and my involvement continues with the town. I'm the liaison between the Sequoias and the town. Sequoias is as old as the town and has a great interest and presence in the town. As residents of the town, and as the decades-long participant in town management of many challenges, I'm extremely interested in the current issue of the housing element update.
Thank you. And thanks for reminding us that we were all supposed to be answering that question. So I see William Kelly next on my screen, and Amy and Ann, if you want to jump in to answer that one question, feel free.
Should I go ahead?
Sure, William. William, I think you go by Bill, right?
I do, in fact. Hi there, I'm Bill Kelly. My wife and I have lived in Portola Valley since 1994. We raised 3 children here, all of whom have moved elsewhere, although one is still in the Bay Area. I practiced as a corporate lawyer and a company executive type person for most of my career, retired a few years ago, and this is the first involvement I've had in town government, although I've been part of the county bicycle and pedestrian committee for the last 5 years or so. I volunteered for this exercise because I think it's just an extraordinarily important issue, not just for Portola Valley, but for the region that we live in. So I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. Al Sill.
Okay, I'm Al Sill. I've lived in town for over 30 years, raised 2 sons here. I worked in the computer chip industry during my working career. I'm now retired. I've got a lot of volunteer experience with the town. I was on the Water Conservation Committee, the Sustainability Committee, the Wildfire Preparedness Committee, and currently I'm on the ASCC, and so I'm the liaison with the ASCC for this committee.
Sarah D.
Hi everyone, Sarah Doherty. We moved here 8 years ago. We put 3 children through PVSD. I have 1 left in 8th grade. I worked in various volunteer roles in the school district and has been very thankful to do so. It's the best way to meet people, feel connected to the town. In a previous life, I was a high school teacher and a middle school teacher and an English teacher overseas, various international schools, and also here in San Francisco. But I've been a stay-at-home parent for a long time now, and this is my first time on a town committee. I'm looking forward to giving back to this wonderful place, and I'm sure that we'll arrive at a resolution that keeps 89.9% of the people happy.
Janie.
Hello, I'm Janie Ward. I've lived in town almost 20 years. Fortunately, part of the Priory community where my family has lived on campus in the faculty housing. So I, vested interest in this issue, obviously. In my early career, I worked in real estate in Virginia and worked with the Regional Sustainability Commission to develop zoning for renewable energy, particularly solar. And then also with the Home Builders Association to build below market rate housing in predominantly Section 8 neighborhoods to try to increase diversity and make the communities a little bit more healthy, really. So I'm excited to jump back in and do this kind of work here. My kids are grown. I have one just moved back from college and one who's a junior at Priory. So I wanted to give back to the town now that I'm no longer volunteering in the schools.
Thank you. Bob?
Hi, I'm Bob Turcott. I have a background in engineering and medicine in cardiology, and a continuous thread through all that of research, more recently sort of tending towards data science. We've lived here 15 years, and for the first 14 and a half of that, blissfully enjoyed the amazing place that this is. Really the fruits of other people's labor. And about 6 months ago, I started to become more tuned in to what was going on in the town and became more and more interested, and saw this as an opportunity to get involved and give back and roll up my sleeves and actually do some work, as opposed to simply, meekly offering suggestions from the sidelines. So I'm very happy to be able to actually do some hands-on work. I have to admit I'm daunted by the challenges because there's a lot of conflicting demands. If we achieve 89.9% satisfaction, I'll be thrilled. So I look forward to working with everyone. I read people's applications, and I think it's a really impressive group. And I'm thrilled to be working with people and learning from everyone here. Thank you.
Karen?
Hi, I've lived here for about 20 years. My professional career was in tech. In regards to the town, I'm the representative from the Equity Committee, but I also serve on the Wildfire Committee for the last 3 years. And my goals are, I would like to see our town just be a lot more diverse, both in terms of what kind of housing stock we have, but also the types of residents.
Thank you. Jocelyn?
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Swisher. I've lived in Portola Valley about 23 years and raised 2 children who are now in college here, and I've loved it. Let's see, I professionally started in corporate finance and real estate finance in New York, and I came out here for my MBA when I got into the high tech scene doing marketing and business development. I guess professionally, most recently, I've been in the nonprofit world as a leader. Peninsula Bridge is the organization I was most recently affiliated with for about 7 years, which was all about providing equity to economically disadvantaged students in our community, and helping them succeed from middle school through college graduation. It was super rewarding, and I just realized how important it is to maintain equity for all people in our community and maintain diversity. And I really support that. So I think the work that we're doing is a great avenue to, addressing that in our town. I've missed being involved in the town. I've been really involved as a volunteer while I was raising kids in the schools, like many of you in the foundation. I was then on the school board for about 5 years. One of those years I was board president. So in that context, got really familiar with how to operate with the Brown Act and how to sort of function as a committee, working with staff and leadership in, the organization, addressing the public's needs and keeping, dialogue going, and doing it all kind of under this auspices of Brown Act. So it's, I saw at the schools that you can do it effectively and get a lot of great work done, and kind of looking forward to doing that again. I was also involved in raising money for the town center. That took several years. I did that with Sally Ann Reese and Beth Rabiseski and a bunch of other people. And that was a really rewarding project. It's nice to see that little photo down on the right of one of our buildings that we raised the money for. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to getting back involved in the town. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Adrienne?
I'm Adrienne Smith. I'm the senior planner with the town. I'm pretty new. I joined at the end of July, and primarily my role will be working on the housing element update. So this is a big night for me. It's great to meet everybody. I live close by. I'm a neighbor, I would say. I live in Ladera, and I moved out here about a year ago. I'm originally from Toronto, and we headed out here probably about 6 years ago now. So I feel pretty integrated into the area, and so this is exciting to be involved both with the town and given that I live so nearby. So I look forward to working with all of you in the coming months.
Thank you. Nicholas?
And my name is Nicholas Targ, and along with Anne, I'm a liaison from the Planning Commission, and had the pleasure of helping to work on the housing element update in the last iteration. I've been in town now for about 12 years, raised my kid here. My family's been here in one form or another for, I don't know, 40 some odd years. Sue probably knows better than I. And it's a pleasure to be here with you. Professionally, I'm a land use and environmental lawyer. I practice statewide. A lot of what I do is straight up environmental compliance, clean up dirty sites and help people reuse them. I do some straight up land use work, and also work with coalitions and nonprofits on policy related issues. In a previous incarnation, I was the counsel to the Office of Environmental Justice and the deputy of that office with the US EPA for a number of years. And before that, I was doing big sky work with Department of the Interior, and served on a brush burn association for some period of time. So I have a healthy respect for both where we live, effects of climate change, and what it means to be in such a beautiful place at the same time. And we're working on issues of density and intensity, equity, and housing.
Helen? Thank you, Nicholas.
I am Helen Walter. First, I always have to say I do work for State Senator Josh Becker, so I am not speaking for him on his behalf at all. I am representing myself fully and completely. I just need to make sure that that's always clear. My family has lived in town since 1983, so 38 years. I am a single mom now. We're doing the multi-generation thing. My son is with my parents, and my son is a rising 7th grader at Corte Madera. I am trained as an urban planner, but my background actually is policy, and I have worked with Green Foothills doing advocacy for sustainability, as well as with Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. And I now am working for State Senator Josh Becker for climate and sustainability and land usage. So I'm excited to be here and to build our future together. Thank you.
Thank you. Cara?
Hello, everyone. I'm Cara Silver. I'm the town attorney, and I've been serving as the town attorney for about the last 3 years. I'm currently affiliated with a law firm and represent other public agencies and public clients as well. But the town of Portola Valley is my favorite client. I previously worked as an in-house city attorney for several different cities prior to joining the private firm. I worked for 10 years in the city of Palo Alto, and prior to that, I was a deputy city attorney for the city of Santa Monica. So I have lots of experience in a variety of public sector issues, and I do all of the town's legal work, but I have a primary interest and passion in land use and housing issues. So it's a pleasure to help staff this committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Card. Jeremy, do you want to talk? Are you there but not there?
No, I am here and I am here, although I am not going to come on camera today because I had major dental surgery on Friday. I am without one of my front teeth. You can probably hear it in my lisp, so no one needs to see that. My name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm the town manager. I've been with the town 4.5 years. It is an absolute delight to see some of you and put faces to names. Others, folks I've worked with for a long time, and I stand by with the rest of the staff to make this the best experience possible for you. So thanks for your time and your commitment over the next period of months to this really important, critical project. Thanks.
Jeff, do you want to go back to the agenda now that we've done the intros?
Did Laura? I don't think Laura introduced herself.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Laura.
That's okay.
You're not
I'm
getting off
Laura
that easy.
Russell. Yeah, I'm the planning and building director. So my role in all of this is to kind of oversee and to facilitate. And I'm very excited to be able to have this opportunity. This is some of the most important work that's happening in my field. And this is why I'm here in Portola Valley to do this important work with the community. So this is everything I had in mind. I've been working for the town for 3 years. Previous to that, I've worked in San Carlos, Atherton, San Bruno, Palo Alto, and started out for the city of Merced in the Central Valley. So I've been practicing as a planner here in the Bay Area for quite a while. It's really amazing to work with residents that are so committed to the community and to the process. So we're going to be trying hard to give you good information and help you to lead this process to good results for all of the residents. So thank you very much in advance for the time that you're going to put in. We're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura.
Okay, I think that concludes introductions, and that we'll move on to item 2, which is selecting our chair and vice chair. I don't have an easy, neat way to do this. I guess what I would probably suggest is that we'll start with the chair, and I would just open the floor if anyone cares to nominate someone. And then I guess we'll just vote. Does anyone care to nominate a chair for the committee? Amy, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, I would like to nominate Jocelyn Swisher as our chair for many reasons, not the least of which is she actually mentioned the Brown Act and her comfort with it. And I have to recognize that as a public attorney. So good on you.
I caught that too. And yeah, that was probably your first mistake, Jocelyn. Anyone else wish to nominate someone for the chair? Helen, I see your hand up.
I'd love to nominate Janie Ward. I appreciate her background with Section 8 housing and feel that that is, we need someone with knowledge around those areas. I have a little bit. I know Nicholas Targ has a little bit, but that is a really complex capital stack that you need to figure out with the funding mechanisms for those type of housing. And I would appreciate someone with that background.
I really appreciate you doing that. It was so long ago, though. I truly would nominate Jocelyn, but thank you.
Thank you both. And Jocelyn and Janie, you are allowed to decline the nominations if you so choose. So I should say, okay. Okay. Is anyone else wish to nominate someone? Okay, I don't see any hands up. Maybe the easiest thing.
Question.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a question. I couldn't tell, Janie, were you declining or were you just expressing gratitude?
I would prefer Jocelyn, but thank you, declining.
That sounds like a.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we have two nominees, one of whom is declining. What I would suggest is maybe someone could make a motion to nominate to elect Jocelyn, and we could vote yes or no on that motion. That's acceptable.
I'm happy to make a motion.
I have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion moved by Armsby, seconded by Koff-Sill. Any discussion? If not, I will take a roll call vote, please.
Who does the roll call?
I do. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to, we'll get our systems up and running. Okay, Councilmember Alves.
Aye.
Committee Member Armsby.
Aye.
Sue Crane.
Aye.
Sarah Dorahy. I hope I got that. I hope I'm getting closer. Bill Kelly.
Aye.
Ann Koff-Sill.
Aye.
Al Sill.
Aye.
Nicholas Targ.
Aye.
Bob Turcott.
Aye.
Karen Vatra.
Aye.
Janie Ward.
Aye.
Sarah Warnikoff.
Aye.
Jocelyn Swisher.
Nay. No, kidding. No, I'll do an aye.
Helen Walter.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Congratulations and thank you, Jocelyn.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Do you want to take over for the vice chair one or?
No, you're doing great. You go, Jeff.
All right, this is the last thing I'm doing. The other second item is we're nominating a vice chair. And I'm going to go ahead and I will nominate Al Sill, who has a lot of I thought it'd be nice to have someone with a little bit of background in town processes, just to sort of as a backup. I will nominate Al. Are there other nominations for vice chair? Okay.
Actually, yeah, can I nominate Sarah Warnikoff, who also is knowledgeable about town processes? And I don't know any of the people on the panel well, but I want to say one of the things that impressed me about Sarah was one of the town council meetings. Usually, in my 6-month experience, people vote in unison. All town council members vote together, all planning commissioners vote together, etc. Most of the time, not always. There was one meeting where there was a proposal to purchase software, and Sarah did not vote to buy the software, and she indicated because she didn't know enough about it, and that really impressed me. And so I would like to nominate her for vice chair.
I appreciate that, Bob, but I'm going to decline too, because I think given my role on town council, it would be, you guys tell me, Laura and Cara, it seems like I thought that was inappropriate for one of the council members to take a leadership role on the committee, given that we actually are already going to be within the leadership group. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it is a judgment decision. I think it could be legally acceptable for you to serve as the vice chair, but both council members already have a leadership role in as serving as the council subcommittee. And so staff will be interacting with them on a regular basis in that capacity. So I think it would be nice to have another person to provide additional leadership. That's just my opinion.
I agree.
It would be acceptable either way.
I agree. So thank you, Bob, but I decline. For that reason, Laura mentioned. I think having more people in the leadership group is better.
Can I just get clarification? Also, I'm sorry, I didn't write down everyone. Mr. Sill, is he also on ASCC?
I am on ASCC, yes.
Okay. Does that make a difference too? Is we have, like, I'm just curious.
No, being on ASCC, he's not already on the subcommittee for this housing element committee. And so what we want to do is make sure we're optimizing for that subcommittee.
Thank you.
Any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, seeing none, we have now one nominee. So as before, I think the easiest thing was to entertain a motion to approve Al as our vice chair.
I'm happy to make a motion to nominate Al as vice chair.
Okay, Sarah made the motion. I didn't see.
I'll
Amy
second.
seconded. Okay,
Yeah.
Moved by Warnikoff, seconded by Armsby. Roll call vote, please.
Jeff Alves,
Aye.
Amy Armsby,
Sorry, couldn't unmute. Aye.
Sue Crane,
Aye.
Sarah Dorahy,
Aye.
Bill Kelly,
Aye.
Ann Koff-Sill, Al Sill,
Aye.
Nicholas Targ, Bob Turcott,
Aye.
Karen Vatra,
Aye.
Janie Ward,
Aye.
Sarah Warnikoff,
Aye.
Jocelyn Swisher,
Aye.
Helen Walter.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes as well, and thank you, Al. Jocelyn, it's all yours.
All right.
Jocelyn, in
Whoa,
fairness,
Rusty.
I was going to say, in fairness, I know we're just kind of like dumping on this, but if you would go ahead and just kind of run the agenda items. And as you'll see, the majority of the content is going to be coming from the town staff. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, again, I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Okay, so next up on the agenda is the committee discussion. What is a housing element and why is it important? And we've got Laura, Russell, and Adrian on deck.
So Adrian's going to give a presentation. And then if Cara and Jeremy want to chime in at all, they'll have a chance to do that. And then we'll be happy to take any questions or comments about that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Adrian. And you're just a little bit, your mic is a little bit fuzzy, Adrian, if you can just pull that.
How about now? How's that sounding?
That sounds better. Does that sound better for everyone?
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question? I'm assuming all these slide decks and materials will be shared with the committee so they can have them for their notes.
We certainly can, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and congratulations, Chair Swisher. Once again, I'm Adrian Smith, Senior Planner, so I'm going to share a few slides that take a deeper dive into the nature of the housing element. So the key topics I'll cover are what is the housing element, the legal framework that informs the element, the regional housing needs allocation methodology, and I'll provide some local and regional context, as well as chat a little bit about the town's existing housing strategic plan. So before we jump into the nature of the housing element, I want to touch upon the general plan itself. So you can think about the general plan as a town's constitution. It's a long-range, comprehensive guiding document that lays out how the town is planned and managed, from our roads and sidewalks to our parks and neighborhoods. The general plan is organized into 7 elements, and these include land use, open space, circulation, safety, conservation, noise, and of course, why we're here, the housing element. Overall, the general plan embodies the town's major community goals and lays out a series of policies in order to facilitate those goals. All land use approvals and decisions made in the town must be consistent with the general plan. So with that foundation in place, we move into what is a housing element. So the housing element lays out the goals, policies, and actions that help the town plan for housing. The housing element embodies town values and priorities. And the housing element update process that we're embarking upon involves revisiting past housing policies, approaches, and performance, which allows us to learn from the past and look towards the future. Housing elements cover an 8-year cycle, which means the town's updated housing element will cover years 2023 through 2031. The key areas of the housing element include housing needs and trends, constraints analyses, evaluation of past performance, policies and programs, and a sites inventory to ensure there's enough land zoned for housing that will meet our regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So there's a strong state legal backdrop informing the requirement of a housing element. State law requires all jurisdictions to have a housing element certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD. There are teeth to the housing element law, and jurisdictions that don't comply can face a number of corrective actions, including fines and fees, funding disqualification from state funds, bonds, grants, and loans. This is super brief, and we do have an expert here, so I wanted to see if, Cara, you wanted to add anything at all in terms of background for legal framework.
Thank you, Adrienne. So in terms of the legal framework, what might be helpful is to discuss some of the trends that we have been starting to see. And this, excuse me, the train is passing by my office, and so I sometimes get the train noise in the background. But this housing element cycle, we have seen a shift. The shift has been coming for a while, but I think it's starting to really evidence itself in this particular cycle. There are a few things that we are starting to see, and that is the state is exercising more and more control over local agencies. And so in the past, where we may have had a lot of discretion as a local agency, a local town to adopt certain policies and zoning requirements, et cetera, we are seeing that the state is really restricting a lot of that authority. Even with respect to charter cities, which traditionally have had more local authority than general law cities. The town of Portola Valley is a general law city. One of the other trends that we're seeing is that HCD stands for the Housing and Community Development Agency. It's a state agency. It's the regulatory agency that approves the housing element for each one of the cities. And we're seeing that HCD is stepping up its enforcement action and is becoming very involved in overseeing the housing element process. And that is coming up not only during the 8-year certification period, but we have seen HCD actually in the middle of housing element cycles take enforcement actions against cities and towns who are not complying with their housing element on an ongoing basis. So that's something new. The other sort of emerging trend that we are seeing is the importance of equity. Equity not only as a policy issue, but also in terms of the requirements now that are incorporated into the state framework that comes up in terms of now we are, local agencies are required to incorporate a discussion of affirmatively furthering fair housing, which we will probably get into later. That's a legal requirement now as part of the housing element. Also, some cities that have larger minority populations are required to adopt an environmental justice element in connection with the housing element. So for instance, Menlo Park and East Palo Alto will be required to adopt an environmental justice element. Portola Valley does not meet that threshold, and so we will not be required this cycle to adopt such an element, but we can probably expect that in the next cycle to come. And also one of the trends that we're sort of seeing at this point is a move from housing approvals, which typically have been discretionary. So most agencies have a conditional use permit process or some form of discretionary process to approve housing projects. Now the state is really focusing on and giving incentives and even requirements to cities and towns to approve housing projects by right. And so you will see with some of the new housing element legislation that the state is really focusing on the requirements to or the zoning ordinances which allow for housing to be approved by right as opposed to through a discretionary process. And we'll talk more about this later on, but I just wanted to kind of preview those trends that we are seeing in connection with the housing element.
Is it okay if I ask a question, or do you want to hold questions till the end?
I'm going to recommend that we hold questions till the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Cara. Continue along here. So the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, is a key driver of the housing element. Generally speaking, RHNA is a prescribed number of housing units at various economic levels that a municipality must plan for. The overall goal is for all Bay Area jurisdictions to take on its fair share of the state's housing units. The HCD determines overall units for the 9-county Bay Area. The responsibility for assigning each jurisdiction's share of RHNA lies with the Association of Bay Area Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, ABAG, and MTC. So the RHNA methodology starts with the State Department of Finance's population growth projection, and from there, a prescribed number of overall housing units is determined by the Department of Housing and Community Development. From there, ABAG develops the draft methodology in conjunction with a committee of elected officials, staff from cities and counties, and stakeholders. This committee is called the Housing Methodology Committee. Their work is further informed by Plan Bay Area 2050. So the RHNA numbers take into account jobs to homes ratio, proximity to jobs and education centers, expected job and population growth, and demographic trends that affect housing demand. So here we see the actual RHNA numbers assigned to Portola Valley organized according to 4 income levels. While the above moderate income housing, or market rate housing, which is the last row at the bottom, generally takes care of itself due to market demands, it's the very low and moderate income units that are more challenging to obtain. It's important to note that the town doesn't build housing, but they do need to make sure that there is a plan that allows for these housing units to be built. So here's a little bit more detail on the actual county income levels and how they shake out. So when we look at very low income, we see that for a family of 4, that's $52,000 to $87,000 per household, or $41,760 to $69,600 for a family of 2. So it's simply, I won't read it all out to you, but I did want you all to have a look at how those income levels actually look in application. So to help us contextualize these income levels, this chart provides examples for several occupations. Many, if not all, are likely represented in our Portola Valley community. For every 6 low-wage jobs in San Mateo County on the whole, a low-wage job is considered making about $20 per hour. We only have one home that such a worker could technically afford. And an affordable home is considered around $1,500 a month for rent, which is still about 50% of the full-time wage of a low-wage worker. So we have a few examples laid out here to understand the housing constraints placed upon many individuals that work in our community. And we can see the constraints here and the challenges on affordability. So housing has long been a priority for the town and is captured in the town's housing strategic plan. The plan identifies and seeks to address the negative impacts caused by the high cost of Bay Area housing on the town. The plan identifies 3 key underserved populations in Portola Valley: seniors and empty nesters, young adults who are raised in the town, and employees of town businesses. The plan also lays out 6 key strategies to address these housing challenged groups: accessory dwelling units, ADUs, town-owned property, affiliated housing, affordable housing funds, shared housing, and community engagement. These 6 strategies will continue to be significant in the town's approach to planning for housing units and will be fleshed out in our updated housing element as well. As the staff expert on these programs, I'd like to just pass this over to Laura and she can provide a brief update on these strategies.
So briefly, the things that we've been working on these areas is number 1, ADUs. In 2019, the Planning Commission undertook a very large update to the ADU ordinance to try to encourage more ADUs and to find the right level of regulation versus encouragement to encourage people to build ADUs in the community. And then most recently, over the past several months, we've undertaken another update to the ADU ordinance to bring it into compliance with the most recent state laws. The state laws have changed a lot for ADUs over the last 5 years or so, and we anticipate they'll continue to change into the future. But ADUs are considered an important affordable housing resource and a way to add units into residential neighborhoods throughout the state. One of the challenges that we face with ADU regulations are kind of a one-size-fits-all approach that the state has been taking. So the Planning Commission has been working hard to make recommendations to help those state laws fit into the community as much as possible. So we do anticipate ADUs continuing to be an important part of housing in the community. Next is town-owned property. So over a couple of years' time, a committee was convened to look at property that's owned by the town to see if any of those sites would be appropriate for housing development, specifically affordable housing development. So Jeremy Dennis led that effort. They met over quite a bit of time, came up with a list, brought that to council. There was a lot of community involvement in that. One site was considered to be acceptable, another raised a lot of concerns from residents, and the council took all that into consideration. And so that work, we'll see how that will funnel in to the work of this committee, since they already did some of that work we would otherwise be doing. So that's great. So we'll bring more information to you on that as we get to that point in the process. Number 3 is affiliated housing. The town has a long-standing policy to encourage housing development through our affiliated housing program. And that goes back at least 2 housing element cycles. And it allows certain institutions in town to build housing for their employees, is how it's written today. And so the Priory has taken advantage of this, and they have 6 units, that are in construction right now. And as you heard, we have a committee member that has actively participated in that process. And then staff has had conversations with the Sequoias. They have done some feasibility and exploratory studies to see if that may be appropriate for them. Stanford is also an affiliated housing partner. The project that they're pursuing is not technically an affiliated housing project, but they have been designated as an affiliated housing site for many years. So number 4 is affordable housing funds. So this is something that the council identified as a priority and then decided to wait to see how some other things were developing. And then there's been different levels of interest, and we've gotten some inquiries, and people have started to ask us again, is it the right time to start to look at that? So we will be picking that issue back up as we're regrouping here at this stage of the pandemic to put some additional time and attention onto this question of our existing affordable housing funds and what would be a good way to spend those. We'll get into how we got all that money and what all that means later on, but we have a program that generates affordable housing funds under certain circumstances with subdivisions. And then shared housing is through HIP housing, and the premise there is that they help pair up people that have units or rooms in their homes to rent with people who want to rent them. And so that's something that we've tried to advertise, and it's been a really great program. And so we've been trying to get the word out for that for a couple of years. And then community engagement is something that we are always aiming to do, and why we're all here. And for this committee meeting, to use community engagement to inform all of our process. So that's the summary, and be happy to answer any questions when we get to that point. So back to you, Adrienne.
Actually, that just about wraps it. So thank you, Laura. That's the end of my presentation on housing elements. So yeah, now's a great time for questions.
So just in terms of, thank you both, in terms of process, if assuming that this follows what we do for the town meetings, would Jocelyn now take public comments and then, or take questions actually from the committee and then public comments, is that correct?
Questions from the committee for staff? Yes, and then if she wants to take public comments, then that would be the time to do that.
Okay.
So I know in the school board meetings, I seem to remember that we had to have it designated ahead of time that we'd be getting public comments on certain items of action. Does it matter if it's just discussion versus action?
We've typically allowed public comment on every item on our agendas.
Great.
Cara, is that, I mean, I assume that's kosher.
Yes, that's correct.
It's not like we've got it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, the school board has slightly different meeting protocols. They don't impact the Brown Act, but yes, so we allow public comment on all of our agenda items, and there will also be a public oral communication section of your agenda that comes at the beginning as well.
Okay.
And I would just add, as we move forward in this process, since this is a unique committee, we'll talk about how we want to structure those public comments to make sure that that's productive and people know what to expect. So it'll be something that we'll pick up that conversation as we move forward.
That's great. I think another thing that comes to mind is just how the committee can interact with a point person on the town side in putting forward ideas for agenda items going forward. Who would the point person be? Is it you, Laura?
In general, yes, that's going to be me. So Adrienne will take the day-to-day communications on the small stuff, and then the bigger things that involve the agenda setting and those items will come through me.
Okay, and then maybe
we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, so I guess
to clarify, we have. So I was going to say, just to clarify, one step, my understanding is after this meeting that we need to do is we'll get the leadership subcommittee together, which will now be Jeff, myself, you, Al, Laura, and Adrienne, right? I'm looking for, okay. Yeah, so we just have to have the planning meeting for that as a next step.
Super, but then sort of how we funnel ideas in to the committee for those meetings, we should clarify going.
Yes.
Okay, so committee, if you have questions for the section we just talked about, the presentation, why don't you go for it?
I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it appropriate for me to ask for an explanation of environmental justice? What does that entail?
Conceptually, it's based on the idea that there historically has been a concentration of environmental impacts on communities that have lower incomes or communities of color. And so there's been increasing attention to that and interest in changing that pattern that has been in place and finding ways to look at that, study it, and address it. So that's the concept behind it.
Okay. I had a couple questions. I might jump in and then we'll go. So I guess there's questions that I hear from people in the community about, well, why can't Portola Valley just go sue the state and stop this whole thing? And I guess I'd love to hear what you would say, Cara, to that. And what's the precedent for doing that kind of thing?
Right. So this is not the first housing cycle where cities in the peninsula in particular have received high housing numbers that make it difficult to satisfy. And so in the last housing cycle, there were also a lot of high numbers, and many cities were didn't take legal action, but they did certainly appeal the RHNA allocations. And what we have found from the appeal of the RHNA allocations is that it's really an uphill battle, and that there are some very difficult hurdles to overcome in terms of the appeal process. In terms of suing ABAG or HCD, in terms of the allocation, there is one published case decision. It's the only published case decision that I'm aware of on the issue that rejected a lawsuit against a state agency on the grounds that the state agency had discretion to allocate these numbers, and that the local agencies did not have the legal authority under the statutory framework to bring a lawsuit. So there have been no successful lawsuits against HCD, the regulatory agency, to date. That doesn't mean that we can't create new law by suing HCD in the state, but at this point there's not legal precedent that would support that.
And then in terms of the appeals, have there been successful appeals that have occurred recently?
Yeah, so the town council considered appealing the allocation, and the town council, actually there were two different junctures where the town council was given the ability to weigh in on the numbers. And so the first time period was about, was it 6 months or a year ago, when the draft methodology was created, and the town council did submit some comments regarding the methodology at that juncture. And then the second, we actually received a response back from HCD disagreeing with our comments. The comments were made based on lack of infrastructure, that the methodology did not account for the lack of infrastructure, and that the town had, I think the draft allocation had been published at that point. And so the town was asserting that the infrastructure was not there to support the additional needs. And then there was also a claim about fire safety at that juncture, and HCD also rejected that comment as well. So, and then in Southern California, there have been other appeals that were made based on similar issues that the town of Portola Valley would assert, such as fire safety and pandemic issues, infrastructure, that type of thing. And we have seen those claims be denied also at the state level. And so, you know, the council considered this and did not believe that those appeals would be successful.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, who else has questions for this section of the meeting?
Jocelyn, do you see the hands raised? That's one way.
Oh, haven't noticed that before. Cool. All right, Bob.
Thank you. Thanks for that that great presentation. I had a couple questions. One was you alluded to this in the presentation on Web page 10. It goes into more detail. It indicates that, of course, the town of Portola Valley is not required to do construction. It's just required to plan to have a plan that accommodates the 253 units. In the agenda packet on Web page 10, it goes on to say that, or to indicate that there's actually an incentive for the town to make sure that that construction actually happens, that there's a downside for the town if it doesn't. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, if I'm understanding that correctly. And what is the downside for the town if the units aren't built? And is the town then in a position to incentivize builders with concessions in a way that it wouldn't otherwise? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe that it does. So generally speaking, there are certain laws that come into effect if you have not made adequate progress on your RENA allocation. So if you're not building the right number of units and keeping up with that over the housing element cycle, then there are certain laws that go into effect.
So this is separate. When you say progress, this is separate from the planning. This is actual construction.
Yes,
right?
construction.
Okay. All right.
So generally speaking, certain types of development projects can be streamlined under state law under those circumstances. So there's a lot of detail, and we'd be happy to get you more detail, Bob, as we move through this. It's a lot for this setting, so that's something we can write down and bring. But in general, what it means is development could be proposed that would be potentially higher density and potentially through a ministerial process, so permitted by right, instead of going through a discretionary process.
If the construction isn't happening at an acceptable rate, you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I would like to learn more about that, and I think it'd be helpful for the committee because I mean, my perception is that there's certainly been focus on planning for the units, but it seemed, my perception has been that the focus has gone beyond that to make sure the construction actually happens. And so it'd be helpful to understand why that is and what the dynamics are there. The other question I had has to do with scope. So 250 units, of course, is a factor of 4 increase compared to the last cycle. We can probably predict, you know, the next cycle may be an equivalent increase, another factor of 4, that'd be 1,000. And so then we start talking about the urbanization of Portola Valley. And so my question is one of scope. Do we take 253 as a number? Do we anticipate that there's actually going to be more growth, and we may as well face the fact now and think about issues of infrastructure and road capacity? Do we turn Alpine Road into, you know, the equivalent of Woodside between 101 and 280 in order to accommodate that? Do we think about, you know, high-rise apartment buildings, stuff like that? So is the 253 sort of what we're limited to? Should we think beyond that? Should we think in a different way? How many employees are there within the town whose income is below the median? Should that be our target? So that's one question of scope. And then the other is, you know, what I just mentioned alluded to all these other issues, all these you know, other elements of the general plan, the safety element, the circulation element. How do we address issues that touch on those other elements?
Okay, so the first one in regards to scope, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think the council's direction to this committee is to review materials and make recommendations that will lead to a housing element that can be certified by Housing and Community Development that meets today's laws. And
So that
so
means
certainly
253.
it's appropriate, you know, to look ahead in the way that that is helpful to be able to plan for that. But I don't think that it's anyone's intention that this committee plan for 8 years after that. And so I think that that is the way to think about the scope question. And then I think we're probably going to cover some of what your other topic was. So maybe we can hold that, and if we don't get to it later on, we can revisit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Helen, why don't you go?
Hi, thank you. Sorry that my somehow my it keeps turning my video. Oh, yep. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, similar to Bob's questions, actually, and that was from page 10. In terms of the town may be forced to approve future projects by right, is that during this RENA allocation 8 years, or is it would it be in the future RENA the allocation? Are we, you know, I don't know what the timing is if we aren't hitting those that threshold.
I'm sorry, I'm not 100% sure I'm tracking the question. Those
Okay, so
requirements.
If we don't hit our requirements in this allocation period, then are we expected to change midstream during this allocation? Or if we don't hit the target for the allocation target for this period, this 8-year period, is it pushed to the next allocation period, or are we expected to somehow increase it midstream along the way? That's, you know, is it this 8 years or what is it, 2030?
Okay, so this committee is planning for the next housing element. Okay, that starts in 2023. There are laws that are currently in effect now that impact, you know, the current environment for cities and towns. And so we can provide more information on how that works, but I think it's probably, you know, it's information for the committee, but it's not, we're not asking the committee to respond to the current housing element situation. Does that make, am I following your?
No, that makes sense. I just was, you know, I was about the teeth that are in place, like how quickly would the teeth go into effect is kind of my question. Which RENA allocation would the teeth go into effect at? And so I think you answered it. It's for this allocation that we're aiming for. Thank you. And then are we expecting, my second question, and I might be jumping ahead. My guess is I'm jumping ahead, but I'll just throw it out there so it's there. With density bonuses and such, would we then meet, you know, zone for even more potentially than the 253 or 263, sorry, I can't remember, to hit the goal? Or is it expect, you know, to give some potential bandwidth to make sure that we hit the goal so that the teeth do not go into effect?
That's a good question. It's recommended by most of the housing professionals that we actually create capacity for more than our 253 RENA allocation. So that is considered the best practice right now because of the way the laws are constructed. So we'll get into this in more detail down the line.
Thank you.
Okay. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to add?
I don't think so at this point. I did have one quick question. It relates to HIP housing. I was wondering with HIP housing, if somebody decides to rent out a room, does that count towards the 253, or does it actually need to be a unit?
It has to be a net new unit. So something that hasn't been in place before. New construction or conversion of an existing building or structure, and then it has to meet certain requirements in order to be counted as a unit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other little yellow hands. Amy, do you have a question? Your hand, it flashed really quickly.
Sorry, no, I see
I,
Jeremy Dennis and Nicholas Targ both have
Yeah.
their hands up.
Yeah. Okay.
Nicholas, why
Wanna
don't you
go to
go?
Nicholas,
Nicholas, go first, please.
can you put
You're
your audio
muted,
on,
Nicholas.
please?
So I'm on mute, so that's not an auspicious way to start. So the question is regarding the product that this committee is going to put together. Are we looking to have a draft housing element for the subcommittee or PC and ultimately the council to vote on? Or is this more of a outline of what would be included that staff then would take and craft into the housing element, which would then go through the usual process? And then as a related question, there's frequently kind of ripple through kinds of effects. So if one establishes a higher intensity or density in one area, for example, not to prejudge at all, one might need to visit other elements of the general plan. And I'm wondering whether that will be considered here or whether that will be handled through a different process. And want to just stop there.
So I'll answer briefly, and then we're going to talk about it in the last, next to the last presentation on the work program for this committee. So this committee, the intention is a lot of this work, this committee will do the heavy lift, and I'll explain kind of the different categories of work and where this committee is going to focus, where we imagine it focusing. And then we have consultant team and staff team that'll be bringing everything together. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, as well as the ripple effect. Because we do anticipate some other changes to the town's policies.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, if I can have a follow-up on that. If we end up with a ripple effect, would we end up also having to revisit or establish an environmental justice element or address environmental justice under SB 1000?
Our understanding at this time is we do not have to do the environmental justice element because we don't meet the criteria. So that's the determination that we've made. Okay. Are you good, Nicholas?
Yeah, at some point, if you could be helpful to know what those criteria are as we move forward.
Okay. Okay, Jeremy, go.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I just wanted to note that in this current housing element cycle, we're anticipating about 100 net new units, mostly through ADUs. So one of the things that we had discussed internally about, I think from a framing perspective, that while Bob is absolutely accurate that it is a quadrupling of the number of units planned for, we've actually seen more units than we anticipated, as at least it relates back to the cycle 5 number of 64. So I just thought I'd share that. It's probably going to end up being just over 100. We'll see next year once we have our final counts. Thanks.
Okay. And then I guess following up on that, on the ADUs, going forward, it'd be helpful to really understand what the new updates to the law are, Laura, you mentioned, and then just where we are in town in terms of satisfying requirements through ADUs in terms of numbers. And I guess Jeremy just mentioned what's expected next year, but kind of getting a fuller picture on that would be helpful. Okay, so I think if we're all right to move on. I
think we have one attendee with a hand up. We've got to go to the public audience now.
Okay.
2 attendees.
I see you now, yeah.
Anybody know how to do that?
Yeah, Jocelyn, I can call on them if you would like.
Go for it, Laura.
Okay.
Then you can train me later.
We have Greg. So Greg, unmute on your end and go ahead. Greg, if you're there and you'd like to speak, please unmute on your end. So if it's all right with the chair, we'll just leave Greg for a moment and see if he rejoins us, and I'll call on the next person, and that's Judy Murphy.
Hi, thank you. I'd just like to ask about the environmental justice. It's not mandated, I think, because we don't have a wrong side of the tracks here where there's polluting industry and stuff where the lower income housing gets isolated. Although I have heard my neighborhood called the Appalachia Portola Valley because we have such small lots. I'm hoping that you will include, even though it's not mandated, I think it might be really important for you to include the environmental justice piece of it. Because there might be ramifications from what you do and what you decide and where the zoning changes come that would like to cluster everything in an area and create, if not environmental justice issues from the pollution point of view, certainly from the ghettoizing point of view. And I think just in terms of overall what you're hoping to do in terms of equity, it would be really important to take that on, even though they don't mandate that you do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Next, we have Betsy Morgenthaler.
How do you do all, and welcome new committee members. I heard Jeremy speaking just now about the ADUs, and I've heard you all before allow that they make up the preponderance of our RENA numbers. And towards that end, I thought it would be interesting for the committee, and certainly I would be interested in learning more about how they are allocated across the 4 different income areas. What determinations you are making internally. I'm sure it's quite sophisticated and not easy, but a relevant question, particularly when we're looking at issues of equity. Thank you.
So checking back in with Greg, if you'd like to speak, please go ahead. Okay, so I think we can probably assume that Greg is not going to provide a comment, so I'm going to turn off his ability to talk.
Through the chair, I'm going to make one comment, I think, which answers Betsy's question, is on red page 9 in the agenda packet. If I understood your agenda question correctly.
I understood her to be asking, how is the cost of a particular ADU determined? I build an ADU, is that a low income unit? Is that a moderate income unit? That's what I understood her question to be.
And yeah, Betsy and I have exchanged some emails on similar topics in the past, so I think I have a sense of what her questions are, and we'll be providing a lot of that information further down the stream.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to thank the people from the town who are participating as attendees. Thank you for your comments and questions. Okay, so on the agenda, it looks like we've run a little bit over. It says we're supposed to do a break for 10 minutes. Do people want to just kind of power through and not take the break? Is that all right?
I'm fine continuing.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Okay. All right. So then we're going to move on to committee mission and goals, and that's back to Laura.
Great. Thank you. So I want to start with a little bit of a preamble and a discussion about the conversation that all of you are going to be having. We really think that it's important that there's a diversity of opinion and experience, and that's why you were all selected. And members bring something unique to the table that allows for rich discussion, and we believe it'll be a better work output. And so a lot of times when we have these kinds of meetings, planners get together and we talk about how are we going to structure these meetings and how do we create a good discussion and a good dialogue between the residents. And one of the best practices that we planners have is to kind of put forward the agreements or the ground rules. And it's something for everybody to think about as we're sharing information. And so I just wanted to offer these up for the committee to consider. And that's to keep in mind that all questions and comments are valuable. that the idea is to listen to understand each other and listen to hear other people's point of view, that there are no right or wrong answers, that we're seeking to respect differences and be curious about other people's positions, and then also to let everyone participate that wants to. So give people an opportunity to speak and participate in the process. So I set those out for consideration for the committee to think about in terms of how you're interacting with each other and how the committee interacts with the public as we move forward. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the town council direction and what the council requested of you. And so we really see the charge of the committee is to develop a housing element that complies with state law and will be certified by HCD. That we've been talking about that. That's Housing and Community Development, the state agency that oversees this. And along with that, we want that to reflect town values and incorporate the best possible planning for safety considerations, given the nature of the community. So that's how staff would summarize kind of the marching orders that the council has given. We wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about what else is important, what comes to mind, what's on your minds. Some of you wrote about this in your application, some of you talked about it in your interviews, but you haven't all had the opportunity to hear from each other, and staff hasn't had the opportunity to hear from all of you. So this is not yet a big discussion, right? It's kind of top of mind when you're coming to this work. Are there a few priorities or key items that you want to bring to the table? Values, concepts, ideas. So the agenda item here is to have an opportunity to just briefly go through some of those so that the committee members and staff can hear what you think are important goals and priorities.
Laura, do you have the ground rules values that you had just mentioned on a slide or something that you can share?
I don't, but I'd be happy to share them if they resonate with the committee. Yeah.
Be great.
Along with I'd ask also along with the mandate from the town council that you mentioned, I think that was included in the application materials, but it'd be helpful to sort of have a convenient location where that's in writing for reference.
Maybe it appears in our agenda each time or something like that, but and I don't know, maybe in a future meeting, we could have a little discussion about them and just get a general agreement that we all buy in and want to uphold them. Okay.
So staff's recommendation through the chair, if you'd like to hear from the committee members, what's top of mind for them, what kinds of values and issues, and specifics or general, that in a few words, what people want to make sure we consider.
That sounds great. Do you want to just go around, Laura, to everybody and ask for input?
I think that would be great if to do it that way.
Okay. So So Karen, do you have any input to that?
I'd raise my hand just because I would like to have more a formal discussion on our values and how we communicate together. So something that come up with the equity committee, and I think that if we can do some of that here, that would be very useful, but because this is probably going to be a controversial topic and it could be helpful. So I'd like to agendize that in a future meeting. Thank you.
Noted. So in terms of issues, values that are important to you, do you want to bring up anything right now, Karen, that comes to mind?
No.
Okay.
Nothing that I haven't really kind of said, so.
Yeah. Amy, how about you?
Sorry, my computer's been a little weird about unmuting. Top of mind for me are issues of equity and diversity. We live in an incredible community. I mean, just a beautiful place to live and to coexist with a wonderful community. And yet, raising my kids here, it has been pretty evident to me that they're in a bit of a bubble when it comes to issues of diversity, and that access to affordable housing is different depending on what community you live in. And I feel very, very committed to the idea of finding a way to improve affordable housing within our community in a way that doesn't undermine the things we love about our community. And I think that's very possible and doable. And I feel that you know, this is a value that we should, that I certainly share, and that is important to me as a parent, as a member of the community, as a member of the larger community that we live in, and really as a citizen of the world. I just think it's very important for us, for me, that we do our best to improve the accessibility and availability of affordable housing within our community. So.
Great. Anne, do you have anything you want to share?
You know, I'm the liaison from the Planning Commission, but I do care about housing, and I would love to see the town be more diverse. And I do feel sad that the financial pressures are so strong that when a house becomes available, maybe what was kind of a modest house before gets torn down, and the maximum, you know, grand house, they're beautiful, but I do wish there was a way to counteract that and make it more available for, can I call it, regular people to live here and to move here and to find, you know, I just love communities that are diverse, right? Just have a mix of people. So yeah, I'd like to see that happen.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
Thanks. You know, I'll reiterate what we as the council settled on, which is we want to meet our requirement with HCD in a way that is safe and consistent with our values. The one thing I'll add to that is that, you know, in addition to it being something we have to do, I've long felt that it's the right thing for us to be doing, that we do actually have an obligation to do our part in any way we can with the housing crisis, which I mean, you know, I see it very acutely around the area. But again, I have a hard time believing that we can't find a way to do this safely. So, you know, I just look forward to just putting everyone's, and again, just putting everyone's best thoughts on the table and figuring out sort of how to meet this and frankly, identifying where our safety concerns are. You know, we talk about, it's a big daunting number. I won't deny that, but at the same time, without doing this exercise, we can't say exactly how hard it is to do safely. I look forward to kind of hashing this out and identifying exactly where we are uncertain about what we can do. But I also, again, feel like this is a really important, important role for Portola Valley to play. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sue Crane, you're next on my screen here.
Okay. I look at this, and as first when I looked at it when I was on the council in the 80s, and George Mader said to us when the state came to us with their position of our putting in low-cost housing, he said, let's do it through ADUs. It will be so simple to do it. We will define it. At that point, the ADUs were only in the only place that we could do it was in Westridge. In 2.5 acres or more, they were the only ones that could have the ADUs. And the council looked at it and they started to hone it and to pare it down, and we made the land smaller and smaller and allowed the ADUs to be built. Well, so many other factors have come in all these years since it's the 80s that I was on the council. And there's so many other things that I look at now, like equity, diversity, fire evacuation. And now that I'm at the Sequoias, I understand that there's a lot more things we have to look at. This is a very broad problem. And I'm opening my eyes to a lot of things that I might have thought this was an easy thing. This is not an easy thing. And a lot of people have the wrong idea of moving these regulations around and saying, we shouldn't have to do this. We should be able to say no to the state, and the state has no reason to make us have to do this. Well, we have to do this. We have to do this, and we will be better for it. But it is going to take a lot of work, and this is going to be a hardworking committee. And I think about, I look at this strategic plan that we have, the accessory dwelling units, affiliated housing, shared housing, town-owned property. We're going to have to review these things again. And it's going to be interesting. That's all I can say, and hard work.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're absolutely right. Okay. Thank you, Sue. Well said. Bill Kelly, anything you want to add to this discussion?
Just briefly, I had said to myself, I wanted to be a listener tonight because I have a lot to learn about this subject. I think I do tend to look at these things at least as much from a regional standpoint as from a local standpoint, because I do think the crisis is real. And what I worry about as we look at how to solve these problems is the more complex we make the solution, the less likely we are to solve the problem. And in fact, people who don't want to solve the problem often use complexity as their ally. And so I think we ought to be erring on the side of relatively simple, streamlined processes that will increase supply, because at the end of the day, this is a multifaceted problem, but it is more than anything else a supply problem. And that we ought to resist the temptation to create a perfect system if we can get a system that actually does add to our capacity and that meets the goals that the state has set for us. That's all I got.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Al, do you want to jump in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very interesting problem. We live in a very special place, but we've been allocated a very large number of units. And I think our real trick is going to be to find the right compromises so that we can keep as much as possible the kind of the look and feel of Portola Valley that people love, consistent with our values, while satisfying what the number that's been allocated to us. Because I think that's only fair. We need to do our part to solve a significant problem.
Yeah, well said. Sarah?
So again, I was hoping to be more of a listener, but I'll have a go. I mean, we really have no choice, right? We've got to make this happen. So my wish is that we as a committee and a town with all of our wonderful committed town people can come up with a solution that might end up being, a great example for other towns. I mean, there's no reason why we can't do this really well. We don't have a choice, so we've got to do it. And if we want this town to thrive, then we want to attract young families who can afford to live here. We want to attract diverse professions, people from all walks of life, because that's what makes a town interesting. And I just sort of hope that we can do this in a way that might end up being, can it be groundbreaking? Can we do something really fantastic here and be inspiring and serve as a great example for other communities? Because like I said, we have no choice, but we just got to find the best way we can do this and maintain the integrity of this gorgeous part of the world. I think it's unique. I've lived all over the world. Portola Valley is probably one of the most beautiful spots to live where you can have access to everything, be in the heart of everything, be 25 minutes from an international airport, which is always my first priority, and yet still live in this bucolic, gorgeous environment with a small town feel. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. So we should do all we can to protect that and maybe do something really special. That would be my naive and Pollyanna hope for this process.
I like that a lot. Being inspiring. Sarah Wernikoff, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't want to follow all that. That was very good.
It was really good.
And I really don't really have much to add. I would just say from a town council standpoint, you know, I concur entirely with, sorry, Bob, with what Jeff was saying. Really, I feel strongly we need to be in compliance. And I absolutely think it's the right thing to do. We definitely need to do our part as a community within the state of California. That's really important to me. And I absolutely think that diversity and, you know, employing all different types of people, or I'm sorry, enabling all types of people who work in this town and in our community to be able to access and live here, I think it'll make the community better. So nothing incremental to what a lot of what's already been said. So thank you.
That's nice. Bob, do you want to add anything here?
I'm not sure how I was contrasted with Jeff's comments. Of course, we need to satisfy the legal requirements. And in fact, I agree with all the values that have been put forth. A monoculture, you know, whether it's agricultural, ecologic, financial, or ethnic, is fragile and brittle. And it's also boring. And, you know, sort of keying off what Sarah Dorahy had said, sorry, this is a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity to be creative. Portola Valley has a history of being a model for others with the way it dealt with its geologic and seismic hazard. That sort of, you know, Portola Valley became a leader. There's Russian textbooks that use Portola Valley Ranch as an example. And so this is a great opportunity. And it's exciting, it's daunting, but I think there's lots of opportunity for creativity and coming up with a solution. You know, if it is groundbreaking, that would be great. And I agree, that's what we should strive for.
Great, thank you, Bob.
Sorry, I just want to say, Bob, I just meant because you were saying that I agreed. Your comments about the council always agreeing. It was just a little tongue in cheek about that. That's all.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
It wasn't a contrast to you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
All right, good. Nicholas, anything you want to add in?
Only that, you know, what a great group of people to be on this committee with, and I completely concur. I guess the two thoughts that I have are, one, we are doing one thing here in particular, and that is we're seeking to comply with the law. And there are different ways in which we can do that. Some of them I think can be groundbreaking, and my hope is that we'll also take the opportunity to look to see what other people have done to achieve this obligation. I think we've got a lot of very smart people here. We're also not the first ones cutting this ground. So to the extent that we find good and useful examples from other municipalities or other parts of the country or world, we ought to avail ourselves. And then only finally that, you know, we treat each other gently. There's going to be a diversity of views and opinions. And the thing that really, I think, that I've heard is a commonality of interests of maintaining the environmental quality, the values of diversity, cracking the nut that the state has given to us, and maybe the opportunity the state has given to us. And the focus is on those commonalities, even as we get into it and we find perhaps differences around the edges.
Nice. Okay, thank you, Nicholas. Janie?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you all, and I already know that I will learn a lot from this process. Having been in an affordable housing community and one of the early first residents to move in, it was a bit of shock to me that we weren't welcome at first always. And it, you know, having been here the last 20 years and coached teams and worked in the schools, volunteered, and you know, really been part of this community, I've, you know, made some really wonderful connections, and I hope to also, you know, illustrate to others that a diversity of income levels makes the community stronger. You know, it is very unhealthy from a planning perspective to, you know, congregate people of the same income level in pockets, and that's a large problem, you know, in this country. And a book that I read by Jane Jacobs published in 1961 called The Death and Life of Great American Cities is kind of the Bible for me of where I first started kind of understanding the dynamics and complexities of housing in communities. And I think, you know, she was responding to the 50s tract home kind of developments and how unhealthy that would be. And as we've seen now, those have become kind of the slums in America. And I think, you know, there's some really exciting opportunities for us to look at, you know, how can we be a model and show the way? And I think my biggest concern is when you build affordable housing, they always tend to use cheap materials and toxic materials, and they really don't look at sustainable features. And for me, I would like to see a requirement be that we have solar, we have, you know, all the highest LEED certification standards, you know, be a model in developing things that are actually good quality. And then you avoid the sort of, you know, I heard the word ghettoization earlier. You know, design things with permaculture principles and walking scores, and also transportation. How are people coming in and out? Like, look at this from a larger scope. And there's some great, like Plant Prefab has some great multifamily housing. They're out of LA. You know, there's some really good things happening out there. And I just feel like I don't feel daunted by this. I feel really excited. And I feel like all my years of studying these things, I worked with prefab companies when I had a solar company here in town. You know, this is a great opportunity for us to shine, actually put us on the map for not running away from a problem and using the best minds of Silicon Valley to solve it. Like, I think this is really empowering, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So.
Great. I love your enthusiasm. Okay, in terms of our committee, okay, Helen, I guess you're the last one here.
Thanks. I know this has been so inspirational. I appreciate everyone speaking up. I like to think of it as the 3 E's. You know, we have such amazing environmental wealth in Portola Valley. So the first E is environmental. And then, you know, building on equity, what a lot of people have said, creating those possibilities for all comers in town. You know, the new census numbers just came out for California, and we are now 65% diversity, while Portola Valley has been rated as one of the most racist towns in the Bay Area by UC Berkeley, with 10% of diversity. So, you know, how do we create more possibilities for all comers? And then the third one is, I'd say economic, which is tied to emissions. So I'll use 4 E's. You know, if we don't bring down our emissions are 50% of all of our greenhouse gas problems. And by creating more housing near our jobs, we, you know, so that Sarah can remain, you know, SFO will not be underwater with sea level rise. So we want to keep those great assets in our community available, and that will take a lot of effort from everyone in this committee. And I'm super excited to be part of it and see how we can come up with solutions for those 4 E's: in equity, economic, environmental, and emissions. but that kind of falls under environmental. But I'm super excited to be here and to create a green place. And I think under Title 24, Jeff would know that even affordable housing still has solar requirements now as of 2020, I think, but Jeff would know better. So
that is correct. Every new dwelling unit has to have solar.
thanks. So excited to be here. Thanks, you guys.
Okay. I'm also excited to work with all of you. There's so much experience and genius and energy and in this group. And I think we're all going to be able to work together and come up with some really, strong solutions for our town. All right. So any input from people who are attending outside of our committee? Yes, I see one from Ellen Vernaza.
I'll allow Ellen to speak right now.
Thanks. Ellen, go ahead.
I think you're still muted, Ellen.
Got it. Now I found it. Okay, I found it. Thank you. I just hope that, like Janie said, that you spread the density around town and not have it centered in, one big area. So like instead of putting 10 units on an acre somewhere, maybe spread it out like in like the Westridge area. If you had a 2.5 acre property up there, you could put maybe 5 units on it or 6 units. So it's not super high density. Or I know the area up in Buck Meadow, somehow they got written off for the low income housing. So I think everybody should be brought back into the possibilities of having the housing in different areas of town, so we don't have centralized areas of high density. And also, I just did have a question. I've heard the number 253, but what is that based on?
Laura, do you want to take that?
Yeah, earlier Adrian was talking about the RHNA allocation, RHNA RHNA allocation, and the methodology. So if you're interested in that, staff had a memo that's part of the agenda packet for this meeting, and there's a couple of links that can take you to more information about the RHNA methodology and the planning process at ABAG. So that would be our recommendation as a starting point.
Okay, so it doesn't have to do with just square miles of the town or.
No, it's very, very complex. Very complex, yeah.
Okay, but I still would hope that you would spread it around rather than having centralized high density. That would be, I think, ease a lot of people's minds if you didn't go in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, we see Rita Combs or Combs. Sorry about your name pronunciation. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi, that's Comus.
Comus, thank you.
Glad to see this group finally up and going. I hope that this group addresses the infrastructure issues before housing is being built. As far as the sewer or the septic, even Caltrain's buses. There was a meeting a couple of months ago about how the bus that takes the kids to the schools is being stopped. And I did not see, I was part of a forum, I did not see a letter that the town sent about this to stand up and say, please don't stop this bus. And for the electrical undergrounding, I know that there's a study getting ready to start, but while we're giving exceptions to different people, that is not, for the future, for us to do this and other infrastructure pieces. So before we start with, wood in hand and a hammer and a nail, making a plan, some of the resources of the town go towards infrastructure and bus service and other issues that are pressing before we put the cart before the horse. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Okay, I see one more. Dale. Would you like to go? Dale, you need to unmute, I guess.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Can you pronounce?
I would just like to make.
Please?
Pardon?
Can you just pronounce your last name, please?
Yeah, this is Dale Fowl. I'm
Thank
on
you.
the Emergency Preparedness and Wildfire Committees. I didn't hear a single person mention safety as you went through what you are doing. And unfortunately, I believe that wildfires are the existential threat of our lifetime. And it ought to take precedence over everything else you're doing because it is a great danger to the current residents and has to be considered in anything this committee does. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, David Cardinal.
Hi, I think I heard Helen say that Portola Valley was one of the most racist communities in California. And I, first of all, think that's completely false. And second, I think what the study said is we are one of the most segregated communities in California, which I totally believe. But if she's coming to here with that perspective, I have a problem with that. I'd like to differentiate between the fact that we obviously have a largely white and increasingly Asian also population and would like to be more diverse versus the notion that we are somehow racist. I hope I misheard that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, it looks like that's it from public comments. So we are kind of running over the allotted time, but I think having all this input from everybody in the committee and the town is really important on these.
Jocelyn, just
yeah.
Sorry, one thing. Jeremy has his hand up. I don't know if you wanted to respond to something.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
Not at all. I apologize. Through the chair. I wanted to provide some information to the committee in regards to bus routes very briefly. There are 2 routes in town. They both serve the school-bound population, and Samtrans has 3 plans they're looking at, all of which would curtail those services in some fashion. I wrote a letter to Samtrans a few months ago in support of the school district's efforts to have a comprehensive conversation about whether or not that was a good move, and very appreciative of Samtrans working with us in the school district. And I'm happy to provide that letter in a future package should this committee wish that information. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying.
Sorry, I'll just point out one other thing. Helen posted a note, but I don't think the attendees can see it. And she is in fact acknowledging David's correction, which is Portola Valley is a highly segregated town, not a highly racist town. So just to clarify that.
Thanks for providing the link to that report too, Helen.
Sorry about that. Yes, I meant segregated, not racist. Apologies. Thank you for that correction to Mr. Cardinal. Apologies.
Terrific. Okay, we ready to move on to the next item? All right, so what we've got, let's see here. Roles and responsibilities of members and staff, and that's Laura and Adrian. And we've got 15 minutes allocated for this one.
This one's probably a little bit easier. So many of you are new to committee service, and some of you have served on committees or commissions that have a little bit different structure. So we wanted to lay out some of those roles and responsibilities to help you anticipate what's coming and to develop some shared expectations. So first I'm going to talk about kind of roles and responsibilities related to the committee. And so we recognize that every committee is unique and they all find their own style. So we've already started to do this. We really appreciate it, you know, encouraging a welcome and supportive environment. So thank you for getting off to that good start today. This is an ad hoc committee. And so it's appointed specifically by the town council for this purpose, for the housing element update. So once that process is completed, and the housing element is certified by HCD, then this committee has served its purpose and then will no longer exist. And hopefully there'll be some fun activity that we can all do together at the end of that. So we can look forward to that point, right? When our services are no longer needed for this purpose. We're going to ask committee members to limit their discussion to the items that are directly before the committee. You've already gotten a taste for how big the scope of this is. And so we're going to be really working with the chair to try to keep this narrow and focused. And then if questions are coming up, we'll try to answer them, but we might need to come up with a way of doing some of that offline or outside of the general meeting, meeting time for this. So we'll work on those strategies. But when we're here in the meeting, we want to try to stay as focused as we can. We recognize that many of you are interested in many other topics, and you volunteer in other areas for the community as well. And so that's wonderful. We're going to ask you to try to separate some of your interests. Some of them overlap. We recognize that. That's why some of you have been selected. But when you're engaging as a member of this committee, kind of think about that as separate from when you're acting as a resident. And this was, somebody already talked about this in the introductions earlier. And so for example, if you go to a council meeting or another commission meeting and people know that you're a member of this committee, you want to take a moment to say, I'm on the housing element ad hoc committee, but I'm speaking as a resident, right? And try to the degree that you can compartmentalize a little bit for yourself when we're working here together in this committee and other efforts that you may be undertaking as a volunteer or as a resident. And then thinking a little bit about the role of the chair, we'll be working with the chair to support the chair and to make these meetings efficient as we can, as productive as we can. So the chair's role is to administer the meetings, keep us on the agenda, facilitate committee discussion, help clarify ideas, help to build consensus, if we need to help mediate conflicts, if we get into that situation. And we'll work closely with the council subcommittee and staff and the chair to support you in doing that. You are going to get
any support.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, we're a team. We're a team.
Okay.
So we'll be working together on all that. So you're going to get in advance of these meetings, sometimes some really detailed information. And we're going to try to break some of this up. There's no good words for it, but it's kind of like the syllabus in college where there's required reading and recommended reading. And so we're going to try to come up with the resources that you think you're really going to need in order to engage on some of these. And then we'll provide some additional resources for those of you that kind of want to dig deeper. So we're going to try sometimes to create that separation. But you are going to get quite a bit of materials typically in advance of these meetings. And we're going to ask that you do read those in advance before we get together, review the packet, be ready to participate in the discussion, and like we've been talking about, working towards consensus. So each meeting is going to be sort of agenda driven. We're going to try to set forward certain things that we're going to accomplish at each meeting so that we can keep ourselves moving towards a timely completion and stay on schedule. So we'll be working with the chair to figure out how we're going to handle the public comments, where they fit into the agenda, what items are we going to work towards consensus. There might be times that we have to take a vote. Maybe there'll be a difference of opinion, and then the majority will rule on that issue. So we'll be working through these different strategies to help you facilitate these meetings. And then we're going to strive to keep the meetings to reasonable length. We have a lot of material that we want to cover, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So that's always a balance to hear people and then also to move through it in a timely fashion. So we're going to strive to set forward timelines that we can actually meet. And we do ask people to meet a reasonable level of participation. We have a handbook for the committees and commissions, and we'll send that out to you. This committee has some things that are different about it than the handbook, but I think the handbook will help you to understand in general how committees and commissions function. So those of you that are new can give you some background information. And from there, we do have a rule of committee members attending 75% of regular meetings. So we hope that you're going to be able to make it almost all the time. Some things are going to come up, but we're hoping for a high level of participation. So we may, as we're getting into some of these topics, need to think about if we're going to have subcommittees or how we may structure that. So we'll have some discussion as we get into those topics. And we might also ask you to assist with outreach for this effort through your own networks, through your own friends and neighbors, to get out some of the word, gather community input, and work with us on that. So that's the kind of summary of the committee roles and responsibilities. And then I wanted to point out that the council's role is a little bit different on this committee than it is on some of the other committees. For other committees and commissions, the council members serve as a liaison, is the term that we use, and they don't actively participate in the meeting discussion. In this format, the council members will be actively participating as members. So I wanted to point that out for those of you that are familiar with other committees and commissions, so that you know what to expect. So then I'm going to hand it over to Adrienne, and she's going to talk a little bit about our staff responsibilities and our role, and then kind of some of the logistics for our meetings.
Thank you, Laura. So throughout the course of the housing element update, us staff will serve the committee in advisory and administrative roles. Regarding our advisory role, we'll be acting as a policy resource, conducting research, and bringing forth documents needed by the committee to facilitate your work. We will also be overseeing community outreach, managing communications to the community on behalf of the committee, and staff will also be coordinating with the town's housing element update consultants, with whom we have council-approved contracts in place. So there are two separate consultants supporting the housing element update, and they're called 21 Elements and Urban Planning Partners. The first consultant, 21 Elements, is our primary housing element consultant. 21 Elements is an ongoing collaboration between the 21 jurisdictions of San Mateo County to collectively address our region's housing needs through shared learning, collaboration, and coordinated action. And the 21 Elements effort has been underway for over a decade. And this organization is recognized statewide as a best practice for housing planning policy. So we're glad to have them aboard. 21 Elements will assist with housing element goals, policies, and programs, all required to meet our state requirements. They're also going to assist us with assessing any land use changes, and we will be working directly with them to prepare draft and final housing elements. They'll also be available to attend any public hearings as necessary. Our other consultant is Urban Planning Partners, and they will generally be filling in the areas not covered by 21 Elements, and that includes community outreach and all other policy changes required to implement the housing element. So they're going to provide us support on special issues analyses, as well as CEQA documentation and any resulting zoning amendments that we're going to need to make to facilitate the element. And quite critically also, state law does require that all elements of the general plan be consistent. So Urban Planning Partners is also going to help us with reviewing all of our other elements in the current general plan to ensure consistency. And they're going to propose any changes as necessary. So once again, as staff are here to support committee members administratively. So each month, staff will prepare meeting agendas and minutes and disseminate recommended reading materials, as Laura was saying, to help you prep for the meetings. In particular, I will be your main contact person for all things committee. So if you have any logistical questions, you require any additional information or clarification, you want to talk something through, maybe you need more resources on a complex topics, whatever you need, just get in touch. And I'll of course be working closely with Laura to get that to you. And while you'll primarily be hearing from Laura and I, from time to time, you might hear from other staff members as well. Potentially Assistant Planner Carol Bork and Development Review Technician Cheyenne Brown. They might be sending out some committee correspondence here and there and helping us with community outreach. So moving on to meeting logistics and general structure. Our recurring meeting schedule, as you know, is the third Monday of each month. We've planned for a meeting runtime of up to 3 hours, but we could always end early depending on how quickly we move through a given agenda. Regular meetings will continue.
Can I interrupt really quickly? I think it's, I don't know why, but it's a little hard to hear you, Adrienne.
Oh, I'm sorry. How
Sorry
about
to
now,
interrupt.
Sarah? How does it sound now? Is it any more clear?
Yeah, it's much better.
Sorry
I'm
about
going to
that.
just freeze in place like this, I apologize.
No, that's a lot better, because what you're
Okay.
saying is so important. We don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. If you need me to back up at all, or if I dropped out on something, just let me know. I can run back, but I'll continue on for now. Okay. So just talking about meeting logistics and structure. So our recurring meeting schedule is the third Monday of each month, and we've planned for a meeting run time of up to 3 hours, but we of course could end early depending on how quickly we move through a given agenda. So our regular meetings will continue to occur over Zoom until further notice. We may require additional meetings or subcommittees here and there. However, we'll give you ample notice for that well in advance. So just like this first meeting, before each subsequent meeting, the committee will receive an email with a link to the agenda packet. Advanced questions are most welcome, and do please feel free to send those my way. Committee members will also receive a separate email with a link to each Zoom meeting. This link allows members to be panelists at the meeting, and so this is the best way for you to access the meeting. If something does go wrong with that email or link, you can go through the agenda and follow that link, and then staff will make you a panelist after the fact. All meetings will be recorded on Zoom and made available to the public as well. Packets and meeting recordings will always be available on the website to review later if needed. And as we continue along through this process, staff will continue to gather helpful resources and post them all to the website so that committee members can find them all in one place. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for all your support to you and your team.
Does anybody feel like you missed too much of the beginning of Adrian's presentation, that we need to re-review it? Or Bob, I see you have a hand
Yeah,
up.
I was going to suggest, it might be my my really old ears here, but I had a very hard time with the consultants, and I'd like to understand what they do. Rather than having you repeat the whole thing, is what you said sort of in written format that you can forward to us?
Yeah, I can certainly put a summary together, Laura.
For me, that'd be great. I don't know if well, I don't want you to have to do extra work, but to understand the role of consultants, I think would be helpful. And then I actually had a question about Laura's presentation. I should have asked this before I nominated Sarah and voted for Al, but what is the role of the vice chair?
Oh, great question.
Good question.
Most importantly, the vice chair will serve as the chair if the chair is not available to attend the meeting.
Okay.
So they'll run the meeting if they need to. And then in this case, we will involve the vice chair in some of our working group activities to provide kind of leadership and direction. So those are the two roles of the vice chair.
Okay. Jeremy, do you want to go?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I wanted to emphasize one of the points that Adrian made, which is the communication piece. We really do rely on the volunteers to be part of our communications effort, communicating what's happening at council meetings, commission meetings, what's happening in my office and the committees is the hardest thing about a job for a government employee. There are so many competing interests for people that will take up their day. So any ideas you have that you think will help augment putting out that information, because as we've been saying, there really isn't much more important work that we do than the housing element and anything associated with the general plan. So we are all ears, and anything that you can do specifically to push that information out through any of your communication channels is greatly appreciated. But just wanted to emphasize that point. Thanks.
So I just wanted to follow up on that, Jeremy, and just ask Adrian and anybody else who wants to answer. How does the town communicate information about what's going on other than at the town meetings, town council meetings? For instance, information about what the Housing Element Committee is doing, when the meetings are, how people can join. And I'm wondering, do you ever push out information through email or regular mail to people in Portola Valley on certain committees or issues or whatever?
I can actually start that and then
okay, go for it.
Follow up. We have multiple communication channels. We utilize existing ones. So we put out information on Nextdoor and the forum. Although that tends to be one-way communication. Generally speaking, we don't engage in back and forth because it can be construed as debating or otherwise. So, but we do push out one-way information. We have our own communication channels through e-notices, and that can include town news, or people can specifically link to committees and get agendas and other information. We have a website affiliated with the housing element that we will keep regularly updated and push that information out. We also have a weekly e-newsletter that goes out. Anything that's associated with a council meeting goes out every couple of weeks as a council meeting summary. So there's many ways that we communicate. We also push information out to our partners. So we will push to the Sequoias, to the Priory, to the school district, to the garden club, to the women's club, to the swim and tennis club, information that they put in their communication channels. We also use, sometimes we use banners that we put in a couple of locations in town, and that usually points people to a website or some effort. So it's fairly robust. Oh, and also social media, excuse me. So we have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram account, although that's used a little differently. So we use all those. We don't do as many mailers because they tend to not stay fresh. Unfortunately, a lot of those just get thrown away. Has been our experience in the past. But those are the primary tools that we use. So it's fairly robust, but it certainly doesn't reach everybody. And we don't presume to know every single communication channel that may be out there that folks think are helpful. I should also add, for those neighborhood channels that we're aware of, we will push information to the folks who have that responsibility. So I know particularly in the Highlands, we push information out for the Woodside Highlands organization and the like.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. That's pretty comprehensive. Thank you. Summarizing. All right, a couple quick questions here, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Sue Crane, go ahead.
Okay, I have a few questions about the getting the agenda. I found it difficult to take the whole agenda and all the information that we got. So I called the town hall and they printed out. I could not read it all on my computer. It's too difficult for me. So sometimes I'm not going to be able to read it, and I'm going to have to ask the town hall to print this for me. I know it's going to be an inconvenience, but I don't know any other way that I can sit and review all the material.
Jeremy, is that okay? If committee members need a printed copy, can they go to the town and ask for help with that?
Sue, yeah, I will personally print you a copy and bring it directly to your doorstep. And I will offer that to any committee member here tonight. We do, certainly for some of the commissions, we do that. So if there's anything that you need, we can have it available for you at the front desk.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
You should order dinner while you're at it, Sue.
It's under
Jeremy reads
mine. Yes.
No, I think Jeremy would like to eat here in our dining room. He has before. Then are we going to get a copy of minutes of the meeting?
Yes. So each time there's a packet, you'll get the minutes from the previous meeting.
Because that should make it easy for me to then relay the information to these people at the Sequoias, because this is important for me to be able to give a thumbnail description of what has gone on to the Sequoians here. I want to keep them up to date on what's happening. They are interested, and okay.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you. Bob, you have your hand up.
Sorry, second time at that. I just wanted to, we're talking about communication. I just want to make the point that communication is bi-directional. And I wanted to thank the 15 members of the community that dialed in and sat through this meeting. And the many of the comments that I heard I found to be very useful and thought-provoking and gave me new insight. So I wanted to encourage residents not just be on the receiving end of information, but also to continue to call in and share their thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Same for me. Okay. Sarah Dorothy, did you have a question or no? You were just waving. Okay, good. All right. So Laura, why don't we move on to the next and second to last section, I guess. Committee work plan.
I'm sorry, Jocelyn, there is a member of the public who had their.
Oh, I'm so sorry. All right, I got to get used to my job here. Okay, Rita Comas. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to make sure that I heard correctly. So this meeting is only going to be meeting on Zoom? I just, if that's true, you know, I just feel that if people, you know, eventually can be in a room together, you know, the best work can be done when people are in a room together. But I believe she said that this was going to be only on Zoom, and just wanted a clarification because this is such a sensitive topic for all of us in the community.
My understanding is just for the foreseeable future, right? Adrian, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, that's correct. It's just for now, with COVID protocols being what they are. But as soon as anything changes, I think a lot of people are eager to get back into the room together, and we'll certainly follow along with that.
And through the chair, this is Jeremy. Let me speak to that. So yes, there's two factors influencing this current thinking. One is COVID and the rise of the Delta variant, and we want to be very cautious as it relates to that. Secondly, if there's been any benefit to what we've been through in the last 18 months, it's the increase in public participation at our meetings. And that's been due to the fact of the ease people can use the tools, Zoom and others to be part of that. The town does not currently have capacity to have hybrid meetings. We are on a very short waiting list to have that technology installed in both the community hall and the schoolhouse in the coming months. We did not believe that it was appropriate to simply go back to an in-person meeting, like even if COVID had subsided, unless that capability existed, we would expect residents to want it. So that's why we've kept this at the status quo. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question, Rita. Okay, looks like we're ready to move on now. Laura, I guess the next section is
Sarah's got her hand up.
Oh my goodness, they pop up right the minute I look down.
Sorry. In fairness, in town council meetings, we have somebody watching that versus we might have to think about that for the future, Laura, to have somebody kind of monitoring the panelist and the hands versus running the meeting, because I think it is hard to do both. Anyhow, I just want to make a quick comment, kind of following up on Jeremy's comments about the importance of communication and the role of the community and the role of the people that are calling in. One of the things that I noticed even way back when I was running for this office is how much misunderstanding and misinformation there is. And I really encourage everybody involved in this, whether it's you, those of us on the committee, or those people that are calling in, to really kind of proactively take the opportunity to correct inaccurate information as it's floating around, because that happens a lot. And I don't think there's any bad intent, but you know, somebody goes on a hike and they talk to their friend and they hear something, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's a misunderstanding. So I really do encourage everybody to be proactive and talking to your friends and neighbors to kind of debunk myths if you hear things that are floating around that are inaccurate. That's all.
Okay, thank you for making that point. Okay, I'm going to look down. Committee work plan. Laura Russell, you're up.
Okay,
again.
Just a second, let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
It looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about the approach, the schedule, and a look ahead to some key topics that we have coming up. So first, we've already been talking about this. There's a fundamental assumption. You know, generally speaking, cities and towns do not actually build the housing themselves. Developers, for-profit, nonprofit developers build housing. The town's role is to create the policies so that it's feasible for those parties to build the housing. So we want to make sure that we keep this as a principle as we're going forward. And we heard that feedback earlier about additional information that the committee would like on this. And so the work is really about updating the housing element, but there's been a comment already about the ripple effect of that. And so we've been talking about the housing element, and the other elements of the general plan must be consistent. So when you change one, you have to look at the others to make sure they're still consistent. And then we also have to look at the general plan map and see if we need to make any changes. So we do anticipate that we're going to need to make changes to the land use element while we're doing this work. And we've been talking about the housing element, but the safety element is also going to be updated on the same time frame consistent with state law. So this committee will be hearing about some of that work related to the safety element and bringing those safety components into this discussion. So the housing element is the main focus, but then we have to deal with the ripple, as Nicholas Targ was talking about. So this committee's charge will also be to look at the other revisions to the land use element or any other ripple effects. And those will be generally staff and consulted initiated. We'll go through the general plan and find any areas of potential inconsistency and bring those to this committee for you to have a look. And then the next step down, the general plan is the Constitution, like Adrian was talking about. And kind of the next step down in that hierarchy is the zoning code. And we do anticipate that there's going to have to be changes to the zoning code as well. And in general, what we're trying to achieve is amendments to the zoning code at the same time as these changes to the housing element. Now, it is possible under state law to do those zoning code changes later, but there's implications to doing that. So that's why we've set this out as a goal for ourselves. So in general, these are the things that the committee is going to be working on. And so here's some specifics about the actual housing element and the work plan for that. And so here in the column are the key elements. These are the things that come out of state law, the things that we have to do to update our housing element. So the first is a housing needs assessment. And so this is a lot of demographic work, housing trends and conditions. The heavy lift for this is going to be by the consultant and staff. So we'll be preparing these materials, getting information from ABAG, bringing this together, and then the committee will have a chance to consider. And then constraints analysis, analyzing and addressing existing and potential governmental and non-governmental constraints to the development of housing. And again, this is heavy lift with consultant and staff, and then bringing that to the committee for consideration later on. Next is evaluation of past performance. So this is where we look at the programs and the implementation of the current housing element that we're in, so referred to as the prior, right? And so again, consultant and staff doing the heavy lift. Where this committee really have very strong roles are in the next two bullets. And that's creating the housing sites inventory. And so what we have to do is find physical sites, actual parcels of land that we find to be available for development or redevelopment. And those sites have to accommodate the number of units that we are planning for Arena. So this is really where a lot of the hard work lies, is in the housing sites inventory. And I'll talk just a bit about about this one in a minute. And then policies and programs. So these are the big ideas. This is where a lot of the big ideas come in. This is where we have some opportunity to be creative, I think, to think about how are we going to address the housing needs that we identified in the analysis sections up above that. So here's where a lot of the committee's work is going to be. And so the schedule. The schedule is challenging because we are trying to do a lot of work very well on the schedule and be certified according to the timeline. So right now, we're in a phase that we've kind of grouped together third quarter and fourth quarter of this calendar year. We're talking about initial development of strategies, looking at sites, looking at policies, having those discussions with a goal of really identifying a lot of those key policies by the end of this calendar year. Then first quarter of 2022, working on sections of the housing element, considering zoning concepts that may implement some of those different things. Second quarter of 2022, with the goal of during that time frame having a complete draft of the housing element, so that we can get other public comments and community input on that. Third quarter of 2022, that's a process of reviewing the complete draft of the housing element. So there's a number of public meetings at this time, community-wide meeting, planning commission meetings, for example, and then looking at the other general plan amendments and zoning as far as we have them developed at that point. And then the big star is when we submit our draft to HCD for review. Then they take a look at it. We anticipate having a dedicated person at HCD that will be assigned to us. So we will have an opportunity to develop some relationship with them. So staff and our housing element consultants through 21 elements will really lead that discussion, and we should be able to have some back and forth and receive comments from them. Then in fourth quarter of 2022, that's when we make any needed revisions to the housing element that have been requested by HCD, and with the goal of approving the final housing element, other general plan amendments, and zoning amendments by the end of the year to make that deadline to submit to final certified housing element finished at that time.
Can I just ask a question here, Laura? There's one that came up on the panel from Dana, asking about whether the committee will be reviewing the entire general plan. And then has the committee read the current general plan? So what's your answer to the first one? Are we reviewing the entire general plan?
No, we do not anticipate reviewing the entire general plan. So the focus is on the housing element, and then any small changes that may be required to the other elements in order to be consistent. So we won't look at the elements where there is not a potential for inconsistency.
Okay.
And then we, if the committee hasn't read it yet, we'll be providing, it's on the website, but we'll be trying to provide the links so that committee members and the public can easily access the materials and find, the resources. So that kind of stuff will be forthcoming.
Okay, super. It looks like Sarah Dorhe's saying the link doesn't work quite yet, so maybe we can go double check that after.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for emailing me. I was able to open it, but I'll email you back and we'll figure out what the problem is with the general plan map.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so this is a look ahead, a little bit more detail on the housing sites topic. So let's be candid, this is going to be challenging. This is about balancing priorities, and a lot of the meat of the discussion, I think, is going to be here. And then we also are going to have a lot of challenges around state laws. The state laws are very complex, and there's a high level of scrutiny that's going to come from HCD here. We have a lot to think about in terms of fire safety and geologic safety considerations. So this is lightly touched on today, but a lot of conversation is going to be forthcoming on this. And then there's also an aspect of this that's about managing change. This is going to be, anticipated to be significant change for the community. So thinking about that, having those discussions, and acknowledging that that is really part of the process. So what else counts towards the RHNA? You're probably wondering. We're going to get into this more, but again, this is just a look ahead. Accessory dwelling units, very important aspect of meeting our RHNA goal. Pipeline projects. We are allowed to count projects under certain circumstances for the next housing element cycle, and we will be talking about this more. And then sometimes, depending on what kind of programs we write, if we can demonstrate that they're going to generate units and we can back that up with data and analysis, we might be able to count some units from future programs. So depending on how we restructure zoning or other policy changes. So then in the policies and programs area, some of these will come from state law, and some of them will be a response to what we learned from the analysis. So when we're looking at our demographics, when we're looking at equity, when we're looking at those types of things, we'll create policies and programs to address those. It's also an opportunity to be creative. And so committee members have already talked about what are other people doing? How can we lead? These are the kinds of areas where the town can really show that creativity and leadership. So we've been talking about this, but I want to put a little bit of language around it, and Cara mentioned it in her presentation. We are now required under state law to look at fair housing, and the terminology is to affirmatively further fair housing. And this vision is really about people of all income levels and across all racial and ethnic demographic groups, living in communities that are safe, clean, have good access to parks, recreation, open space, good schools, high quality amenities. So this is really the vision that comes to us from a state level. And I think we've already heard that echoed from a lot of committee members here today. And so as a reminder, there really have been generations of public and private policies that promoted segregation and disinvestment in certain areas. And this has really come to the forefront in our community discourse as well as in the laws that we're working under. And so even though there were a lot of legal changes in the 20th century related to fair housing and similar topics, many issues remain around segregation and equity. So public agencies must take deliberate action to combat discrimination and address disparities resulting from past patterns of segregation. And we need to also foster inclusive communities. And so in the past, the fair housing law said, basically to summarize, don't discriminate against protected classes. And now the law says to us, take that a step further. Not only do we not discriminate, but now we need to take steps to dismantle the past discrimination and to improve the situation moving forward. So this really is a shift in terms of how we're thinking about this work. And it's a developing area of planning. And this is the first time that we've done this with a housing element, but 21 Elements are consultant on this, bringing in a group of fair housing experts that are going to provide us additional information and guidance. But I mentioned it tonight because it's so important for the committee to think about as an undercurrent of all of the work that we're doing. So that is my look ahead. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I got a question from Helen. Go ahead.
Could we at some point, thank you for taking my question, could we at some point see the environmental justice standards that we currently aren't required to adhere to, but you expect eventually that we would need to adhere to?
Sure, we can provide those.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Bob, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First, a quick comment. I think behind Donna's question earlier was actually a recommendation that committee members actually read the general plan as to understand, what the vision for the town has been traditionally. I think that's what she was suggesting in addition to her question. I have two requests, actually, not so much questions, but one is this might be challenging given how busy things are, but I'm familiar with the model of incentivizing a developer of a large project to provide some fraction affordable housing. Familiar with the ADU model, but there's lots of other models out there. I heard a fascinating presentation by an executive from Habitat for Humanity about affordable equity, which was a concept that I was unfamiliar with. There's mission-driven affordable housing. The Ladera Community Church is proposing affordable housing. That's not a profit driven enterprise. That's really their mission. It'd be interesting to hear from affordable housing developers to actually hear what are the challenges that they face. And so my suggestion or request is that we consider maybe having a speaker series, maybe dedicating 20 to 30 minutes. It's a lot of time, but it's complex material, where we have an invited speaker talk on these different topics. And I'd be thrilled if there was a consensus to do that, to work on pulling in some invited speakers. I benefit from it. I expect others on the committee would. Residents who dialed in would benefit from it. I think it would help all of us understand opportunities and challenges better. The other request I had is we heard from residents and others a vision of distributing the housing throughout the town so it's not concentrated. We also heard from a resident with deep expertise in emergency preparedness who describes our fire hazard as an existential threat, who is basically arguing against distributing the housing. I, for one, don't know how to think about where we should put housing. And so my request to the staff is it possible for us, for you or for others to pull together maps, preferably electronic, GIS format perhaps, where we can overlay layers that show where are our legally designated open spaces where we can't do development, where are our high and very high fire hazard zones or other assessments made by other fire professionals, where are the fault lines, where's the liquefaction zones. The safety element spends a lot of time, this is an old safety element from 2010, spends a lot of time talking about flooding. Where are our flood zones? Where are the transportation routes, the public transportation routes? It would be very helpful for me to start to be able to think about where we can rationally put housing if that information were available. So those are my two suggestions / requests.
So let me just say, I love it when the suggestions are things we're already working on.
Great.
Because that makes it feel like we're in alignment. So
awesome.
We're working through 21 elements to do outreach to lots of different types of stakeholders. So I don't know that would be Portola Valley specific speaker series, but let us understand better what they're already going to be doing and how we're going to bring that into the conversation. And then we can talk about that some more. And then in terms of the maps and resources and the data, yes, that's the idea, that this committee have access to that information. And so you can have some kind of framework to think about these decisions.
Thank you.
Super. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any hands. All right. We can go on to the last section, which is discussion about the Brown Act. I don't have my agenda open on my iPad. I don't know who's doing that one.
This is Cara.
Cara, okay. That makes sense.
Okay. Can everyone see the screen all right?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, so I typically give this presentation at the beginning of the meeting and it's quite dry. And so giving it at the end of the meeting is going to be quite challenging. So if you are able to last through this presentation, you are a rock star housing element commissioner. So what we want to talk about in terms of the Brown Act is for those members who have not been on a Brown Act committee or on a Portola Valley Town Committee in the past, just an overview of the key elements of the Brown Act. The Brown Act is something that only applies to local agencies, and so it is a new topic for many of you. Also impacting this committee's work, there is an emergency order that we are still operating under, suspending certain aspects of the Brown Act. And then finally, happy to answer any questions. So the Brown Act is codified in state law, and it is the state law's sunshine law, and it promotes transparency, and it expects that actions that are taken by a local government should be conducted in public and should allow for public participation. The primary intent behind the Brown Act is on this slide. So in terms of the Brown Act's applicability, the first question is, who is subject to the Brown Act? And like I mentioned, it's only applicable to public agencies. It's applicable to the legislative body of a public agency. So it's not applicable to staff members who are doing their work on a day-to-day basis, but it is applicable to committees or to the town council itself when they are conducting business on behalf of the government. As I mentioned, it's applicable to committees, and in particular here, if the Housing Element Committee were to appoint a subcommittee, it is applicable to that subcommittee as well. There are some caveats there that I can go into later. But in general, for your purposes, the Brown Act is applicable to the Housing Element Committee. So in terms of the Brown Act requirements, the Brown Act requires that meetings, as I mentioned, must be open to the public and that the public must have access to those meetings. Access can be in the form of attending a meeting in person, or under this emergency order, public access is allowed via remote capabilities as well. The agenda must be posted for all regular meetings 72 hours in advance. And that is in order to give the public sufficient notice of what items are going to appear on the agenda. And the Brown Act also requires that agenda reports be attached to the public notice as well. And so those agenda reports will also be available to both committee members and to the public 72 hours in advance, so that the public can read the materials in advance of the meeting and participate in a meaningful way. There are two places for public comment during the meeting. The first place is for oral communications, and that typically happens at the beginning of the meeting. And that's for members of the public to talk about issues that are not on the agenda, but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. So for instance, if members of the public wanted the Housing Element Committee to take up a particular policy that is relevant to the housing element update, they would be able to do that at the beginning of the meeting. And the item would not have to be formally agendized at the meeting. The limitation, however, on these public comments that are mentioned before the meeting is that there can't be any exchange or discussion of that substantive comment, but it does give the public an opportunity to at least notify the committee of an issue of concern to the particular committee, and then it would be up to the committee leadership team and the staff to formally agendize that for a subsequent discussion for the whole committee. Also, what we have is a report out, or excuse me, in terms of comments, committee member or the public is also entitled to speak to each individual agenda item as well. And those comments are generally done at the end of the staff presentation, or but that's subject to the chair discussion. But typically after staff presentation and after committee questions, then the rest of the public is permitted to speak to the agenda item. And then finally, the Brown Act requires that all individual votes of all of the members be taken publicly and be reported out. It used to be the case where you could, take secret votes or votes were taken by ballot and then not announced. But now the Brown Act requires that all votes be taken and shared with the public at the time of the meeting. Another issue that comes up in terms of the Brown Act is what constitutes a meeting. And so this slide shows the different scenarios that are typically classified as a meeting versus those scenarios which generally are not classified as a meeting. Generally, for a meeting to occur, there has to be a majority of the members of the legislative body appearing. A majority is generally used interchangeably with quorum. So if you have, and I can't remember how many members you have on this particular committee, but say you have 11 members, then a majority or a quorum of you would be 6 members. So if there are 6 members, housing commissioners present, that constitutes a meeting. Meetings are generally, as I mentioned, at the conducted on the same at the same place and at the same time. Those are called general meetings, and that's what triggers the 72-hour agenda notice. It is possible for the chair or for a staff member to conduct what we call a special meeting. A special meeting is agendized with only 24 hours notice, and it does not have to take place at the same location or at the same time that your regular meetings take place. There's also a procedure in the Brown Act for noticing an emergency meeting that probably won't come up with this particular committee. The committee meetings also should only discuss matters that are in the subject matter jurisdiction of that particular committee. So this committee is charged with updating the housing element. So we would expect that topics and meetings would occur around that issue. In terms of what does not constitute a meeting, contacts between a member of the public and a committee member do not constitute a meeting. When you have less than a quorum or less than a majority of members, that does not constitute a meeting. And also this typically comes up with committees like you that have a particular subject matter focus. You might be invited to a conference on a speaker series, for instance, that Laura mentioned, where 21 Elements is presenting a particular speaker, and the whole membership of this committee may want to attend that speakership series. It would not be considered a meeting if is provided that the committee members did not sit with one another and discuss the matters amongst themselves. But if they just attended the speaker series or any other type of conference related to housing issues, that falls under an exception to the meeting requirement in the Brown Act, and that would be acceptable. In terms of the Brown Act, as I mentioned, most business is conducted in public. There are some limited situations where a closed session would be appropriate. One of the examples that comes up quite frequently is when the town is pursuing litigation or is a defendant in a litigation, or there could be anticipated litigation. There is an exception to go into closed session to talk to the town attorney about the merits of that litigation. We don't expect there to be any closed sessions needed in connection with this committee, but I did want to mention that. Laura briefly mentioned the distinction between standing committees and ad hoc advisory committees. A standing committee is a committee that is formed to address one specific issue, generally with a very broad focus. So for instance, a finance committee. Finance committee can be formed and the only issue that is to be discussed by that committee relates to the financial aspects of various decisions. But to the extent that any decision that came before the body dealt with financial matters, that decision would then be referred to the particular subcommittee. In that situation, the subcommittee, as is in the hypothetical, the finance committee would be considered a standing committee and would have to be subject to the Brown Act. On the other hand, there is a possibility to form subcommittees that are not subject to the Brown Act. So for instance, if the Housing Element Committee wanted to create a committee to talk about one particular aspect of the housing inventory or one particular policy of the housing element update, you could do that, and you could ask that committee to go out and do their work, and they would not be considered a Brown Act committee. So they could do that without actually activating the meeting requirements.
Oh, that's legislative.
So that's something that can be helpful in committee work when you have a discrete issue that you want to delegate to some further research or analysis. You can have a subcommittee work on that privately, and you don't need to convene a meeting for that purpose. One of the issues that frequently comes up with the Brown Act is the concept of serial conversations. So just because you are talking to individual committee members does not mean that you still that there's no responsibility to comply with the Brown Act. The Brown Act is triggered with individual conversations with committee members under limited circumstances. One of those circumstances is called the daisy chain communication. So if committee member 1 talks to committee number 2, and then committee member number 2 talks to committee member 3, in those series of communications, if it is communicated what other committee members have said in that daisy chain, as you think of a telephone tree or a daisy chain communication where you repeat what other members have said in a seriatim fashion, there is a possibility that is if you get up to a quorum of your committee members so that a majority or more members have participated in some form of this communication, there could be a Brown Act violation. Same thing with in a hub and spoke communication where there's one committee member in the center who will speak individually to each of the other committee members and again communicate what other committee members have spoken about. That is called a hub and spoke, and that also raises Brown Act problems. What we typically counsel to avoid these sort of serial communications and serial Brown Act problems is to select a Brown Act buddy, and you can have different Brown Act buddies for different issues. But when you're doing your committee work, it is important to have 1 or 2 people where you can bounce ideas off in advance of the meeting, So, and that's a very, effective working style. And you want to avoid, though, just having those ideas, having those conversations with a majority or more committee members. The other thing that comes up frequently is social media. If you have a blog, if you're participating in a blog, or if you're participating in a Facebook or Twitter conversation, that also does give rise to Brown Act concerns. And so again, you need to just monitor that type of conversation and know that even email and electronic communications are also considered communications for the purposes of the Brown Act. And then finally, as I mentioned, certain social engagements, conferences, things like that are typically exempt from the Brown Act. And again, you just want to follow protocols of making sure that when you are in public situations, town events that are not associated with your particular committee, that you try not to congregate with other members of your committee and not create Brown Act problems unwittingly. So in terms of the governor's executive order regarding the Brown Act, as I mentioned, the governor did create an executive order, and it provides that the physical presence of committee members to establish a quorum for public meetings are not required during the COVID-19 emergency period. Under the Brown Act, in order to conduct a meeting, you have to have the physical presence of a quorum in order to proceed. If you don't have that physical presence of a quorum in a meeting, then you cannot proceed with transacting any business. So in recognition of COVID-19, that particular requirement has been waived. Also, there are some special requirements in the Brown Act with respect to teleconferencing. And under those requirements, if somebody is going to participate in a meeting, if one of the legislative body members is going to participate via telephone or other remote access, you typically need to allow members of the public to appear at the location of the teleconferencing facility or location. And that typically means the person's house. And so in the executive order, the governor recognized that it can create concerns to allow public members into officials' homes. And so that particular requirement of the Brown Act has also been waived. And then finally, you will notice that when we conduct our remote meetings, all of the votes are by roll call, as opposed to raising hands and voting by collectively. And the reason for that is that's a requirement of the executive order. So this executive order currently is set to expire on September 30th. Given the Delta variant, we'll see if the governor decides to extend that order. But as of right now, it will expire on September 30th. And after that time, effective October 1st, we will need to start meeting in person because some of these requirements in the Brown Act will reactivate. So we typically get questions about the Brown Act, questions such as, may I call in to the meeting? Again, this relates to in-person meetings. And like I mentioned, there are specific telephonic rules to participate in the Brown Act telephonically. So once we start meeting in person, if any of you do need to call in, please contact the staff and we can arrange for that. But do know that there are specific prerequisites to being able to call into a meeting. In terms of the question that we frequently get is from members of the public, can I discuss a particular item? I know it's not on the agenda, but I would like to talk about this item. As I mentioned, the Brown Act only allows public members to raise issues that are not on the agenda during the public comment portion of the meeting, and we are not allowed to discuss in any substantive level that particular agenda item, but it can be agendized at a subsequent meeting for further discussion by the full committee. Sometimes we do get questions of, well, can I just respond to that one question? I know it's not on the agenda. And if a staff member is just providing information that will quickly respond to that particular question, the Brown Act allows for that. What it really prohibits, though, is the substantive discussion by the entire committee of the item that is not on the agenda. And then finally, the question of what happens when there is less than a quorum. As I mentioned, the Brown Act does not permit a committee to move forward and transact business when there is less than a quorum. And so if that is the case, if you think that you're not able to attend a meeting, or if you know in advance, please let the staff know in advance. And if we do determine that there is less than a quorum, we typically will cancel the meeting in advance so that you don't have, other people don't have to show up unnecessarily. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. So
there we go. Forgot about that. Helen, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Great presentation. Thank you.
In terms of the calling in, so for Zoom calls, can you call in just via phone? I mean, my video is not even working very well tonight, but I'm just as well as just not wanting to be on screens. Are there any requirements around that?
Sure. So the Brown Act allows typically calling in by phone is actually was the old fashioned before the COVID, was the way you did participate remotely. It's only due to COVID that, you know, these other technologies have come onto the scene, and it is acceptable to participate just by phone as a committee member. There are some local agencies that actually have protocols that require committee members to stay on screen during the Zoom call. We don't have that particular protocol in Portola Valley, but it certainly is helpful to the public, provided you have the adequate technology to do so, is to try to stay on screen, at least when you are deliberating on a matter.
Thank you.
And there will be lots of things where we're sharing our screen. So I think committee members want to make sure that they, you know, have access to that information. So that's the other consideration.
Other questions from the committee? Okay, I had one. Can you get specific about numbers? Because on the school board, we had 5 members and we were only allowed to talk to one person on any issue. And I guess That's because three of us would be a quorum, I guess. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so I don't know if we have 15 or 16 members. I know
15.
Sarah, 15? Okay.
Okay.
So we could go out and actually have conversations with 5 others.
Yeah, right.
As long as they
So-
don't go and have
7.
conversations with 5 others. That's the thing.
Others? What?
Slippery slope.
It's a
Yeah,
slippery
conversations-
slope. So what's your advice? Is just, you said find a buddy, talk to one person about an issue?
No, I think you can talk to more than one person on a large committee like this.
Yeah.
Now remember that there will be times when not everyone attends the meeting. So maybe there are a couple of absences, so that reduces the voting quorum. And so I think a good rule of thumb for this committee would be, certainly 3 is safe. Once you start getting into more than that, there are some issues. But, I think 3, possibly 4 would be fine.
And if I can add, this is about transparency and doing the public's business in public. And so I think, you want to be able to, especially those of you that are very new to these issues, want to have a chance to be able to talk some things through. But I would really caution you against reaching conclusions and anything that crosses over into too much deliberation, because that should really happen in public, right? That's really the idea and the intent.
I say that pretty much everything.
Will we be putting the link to this meeting for community members who were unable to join to refer back to, as well as if we want to refer back to it, because there's so much information?
Yes. We don't have the website pages set up yet, but we will get them set up so that all of these meeting recordings will be available.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. I think we're done for the evening. Do I get to adjourn the meeting or do I turn it back to Laura or Kara or somebody?
It's all yours.
You do get to adjourn the evening, yes.
All right. It has been wonderful having this meeting with all of you, getting to meet you on Zoom. Looking forward to working with you. And I adjourn the meeting.
Oh, good job. Yay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Good job,
everyone.
Chair.
Have a good night. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.